G'day ladies and gentlemen, ScottyD here from the Australia's Tabletop Wargaming Network, and welcome into another video here on our YouTube channel. And today we've got something a bit special for you. Recently I was invited by the RLG 40k guys here in Canberra to actually join them on their podcast called the Wobbly Player Syndrome for their episode that I believe they've titled Interview with a TO, as they do a lot of tournament organising, running events and leagues and stuff here in Canberra at the moment, and they wanted to get a bit of a perspective of what's involved in terms of running a tournament, or the experience that I have in that, as well as how TOs might handle sticky situations that they encounter in player conduct and such at events as well, which have gotten some notoriety as of late, and how 10th edition of Warhammer 40,000 has impacted the competitive community as a whole. Now, I will stay right up front, this is about a 2.5 hour video, so feel free to take your time watching it. There's a lot of good information after we jump into actually talking about running tournaments and such as well, after about 20 minutes or so of intros and such as well. But I hope that you guys do enjoy this video. If you do enjoy collaborative style content where we do collaborate with other content creators for Warhammer 40k from the network, feel free to leave your thoughts down in the comments section below, or any thoughts you have about what I say when it comes to running tournaments and organising events and leagues and such down in the comments below. If you do enjoy this video as well, feel free to hit a like, and if you want to see more content that we are creating here on the ATWN, hit that subscribe button, turn on that notification bell so you're able to be notified when we are releasing more content here on the YouTube channel. But without further ado, we're going to jump into the interview podcast with myself, and then we've got Greg, Mike, Mark, and Adam from the RLG 40k Wobbly Player Syndrome podcast that I am speaking with as well. So let's jump into it, everyone.
It's too late. We're already live. Welcome. Got him. Welcome, folks. It is Wobbly Player Syndrome. It is a podcast about Warhammer 40k with a bunch of Aussies talking, well, we'd like to say wise words of knowledge that you will take to heart and share amongst the world, but we know better. We have a guest today, but we'll introduce the regulars first because they're very regular. Michael.
Hi.
Mark.
Hey, everybody.
Adam.
Hello.
And myself, Greg, of course. And we do have a special guest tonight. It is ScottyD, as I've always known him. Well, it's not always, but that's what I've known him since day one. Scotty, how are you?
Yeah, going well, guys. Thanks for having me.
No, we're glad you can make it. It's very exciting. We've got a guest. We all got dressed up, as you can tell.
Yeah.
Podcast listeners can tell that too. We're using our real voices this time. It's wonderful. Scotty is, what do you want to be called politely? A tournament organizer, the head of Australia's Tabletop Gaming Network?
Yeah, so the owner/director of the Australia's Tabletop Wargaming Network, where I do a variety of different roles for the ATWN, mainly liaising between different tournaments and organising tournament coverage. And also doing live streams on Twitch currently, doing hobbying, also do commission painting through the network and a whole bunch of other stuff as well. So there's a lot going on. And yeah, I've been doing a lot of tournament organising, running events for a decent while.
Brilliant. Awesome. Thank you very much for the follow that just came through. It made me jump 3 feet high rising. Oh my God. I hope everyone else heard what Scott was saying because that was loud. I don't know why it was so loud. But thank you for joining us. I'm very excited to talk to you about how to run a tournament and how 10th edition has actually had their influence, where that sits. We've also seen some overseas stories of some dodginess going on, so we wanted to know how that's getting handled.
Yep.
It's going to be awesome. We're looking forward to it. But I've known Scotty for a while. We've played a couple of games of 40k. I think it's 1-1 at the moment. We still haven't organised that exciting match.
Yes, it is. We've got to get that organised.
Yeah, I don't know what I'd use, so yeah, it's a problem. Yeah, a bit more competitive than I am. So we met originally way back at Jolt.
Yes. It was back when I was working at Jolt, which was back, 20... I'd like to say it was around 2017, 2018 was when I was working there, from memory.
Make me feel old. Gee, thanks.
Oh, make me
It's a
feel
long
old.
time. Yeah. You mean pre-COVID? How did we do that? We were socializing back then? Yeah. So that's been going, and you've been going on quite a long while. So we'll get into after a break. We should do our regulars before I go down this path
Yes.
because I know that Michael is biting at the bit, trying to tell us the new releases. He's excited, so we better let him have it. Michael,
Well-
what are the new releases?
Well, I mean, it hasn't been that long since our last
No,
episode,
no.
so there has not been a whole lot. But there are a couple of exciting / contentious ones. So we've got, as we were all going on about at the start, the Cerastus Knight Lancer in plastic now, which is so good. And I'm so tempted to get another one, but I don't need another one, but I want another one. And I'm looking forward to when they release the rest of the Cerastus range, because I really want more of those. Like the Lancer's the one I've already got 2 of. I've only got 1 of all the other Cerastus.
Yes.
So that was cool. We also got like a whole bunch. They released a new Necromunda rulebook, like collating all of the previous shit to try and give you like one source of the rules, which is cool. So I was excited about that. No one else gives a shit. And Greg was very excited by Minka Lesk coming out.
I was. It's such a beautiful model. I was very excited about it. And then I saw the price tag on it and said, I'm not that excited about it.
Yeah, we had a discussion about how its value compared to other equivalent models and its use in the game.
Yeah. It's a lovely model.
It's
It'd
a
be
very
good if the
expensive
book came with
Castellan.
it as well. Get out of the bloody... My cat wants to become a space marine.
Sure. Why not?
And normally it's my dog causing the issues.
Yes, the cat.
Sure, they've got a filter for that.
Yeah, it's a beautiful model. I don't know. That price point is just for an Imperial Guard. I think that's what if it was a Marine, a special character Marine, it feels different. But it's not a playable special character.
Well, I mean,
It's just
it is.
I mean,
it doesn't
she
have
has her own
special
rules.
is what you
I'm
mean.
saying. Yeah,
Yeah, she's absolutely playable.
yeah, as playable as you can put her on. But I think I'm
but
also
in the same way that a Green Army man is proxyable into Imperial Guard.
Oh,
Yeah.
not in the same way. She actually is a Castellan.
and she's not a man. Yeah, yeah.
But
Yeah, I think I'm also struggle for me to get excited about Imperial Guard at the moment, the way they've been treated. But yeah, that's me. That's a me thing.
That's
they-
another episode.
Yeah,
Yep.
because I'm a
They don't-
Catachan player. I can't be a Catachan player anymore. So that's a me thing.
there's a lot of Space Marine players who feel the same. You know, every
Yes.
army's like that right now, basically.
It's true. I have a Space Marine army that's green. Yes.
Yeah.
So that was uplifting. Yeah. All right, let's move on to something exciting. Oh, that's right. Let's do all the hobby report. So it hasn't been much in the hobby report because it's been only 2 weeks since we last did the last episode. So I
It
have
was
a
been 2
feeling-
weeks, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, look there.
You
No.
can't expect me
Yeah.
to have painted anything since Tank Day. Come on.
Yeah. So here we go. We have radio mic only. There you go. You've
Yeah,
got some
okay,
great stuff showing up.
Yeah,
So, 40K.
I'm sure I've posted some 40k in the last 2 weeks. Well, there's the salamander that I built.
Yes.
And other than that, got a bunch of BattleTech stuff. And I built like freaking Strike Force Agastus, and I renovated my old Ironclads, and I finished building Leviathan. Like I have built stuff. I even built the Chaos Lord in like this last fortnight.
I didn't see a picture of that on your.
I
social.
definitely posted a picture of the Chaos Lord. I mean, he's right
I
there.
stalked you well and truly. I couldn't find it.
But yeah, it just I've been kind of knocking out old models that I found when I was cleaning my shed. So I've got this like pile of stuff, and I was like, oh man, I forgot that I had, a half dozen drop pods and 3 chimeras and 2 rhinos unbuilt in my shed. I guess I should build those.
Probably. Yeah, you probably should.
I found a whole bunch of firstborn Blood Angel stuff that's super useful, that I'm going to build.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's another story, isn't it? Firstborn. Anyway. So Scotty's also a player of 40k. He's not just an organizer. What have you been working on? in the
S-
background?
So recently I've been working on some Phobos Primaris Marines. I've been having a Primaris Captain in Phobos armor on my hobby desk, as well as 5 Incursors that I've been working on. And the current commission that I'm actually working on for a good mate of mine is actually Lionel Johnson.
Oh,
Oh,
that's a good
nice.
model.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
almost done the base coats on Lion himself, except I haven't started the other 3 heads because the client wanted them magnetized.
Ooh.
And so
Oh,
it was actually
The
really
heads.
easy. Yeah, it was
Okay.
really easy to magnetize because the heads have actually got a little slit at the front that they just slot into, and so you
Oh,
just
okay.
put the magnet further back. Easy
Yeah.
done.
Oh, nice.
And you just leave the back halo off, so you can do the fully helmeted head as well.
Very nice. So basically, he's now got a summer look, a winter look, depending on the conditions. Should be good.
Yeah.
It's a bit
Yeah.
chilly. I'll get my ear
Malibu
tucked away
Lion
a
has a different hat.
Yeah. But no, I've been cracking through the War on Grey Plastic as much as possible. It's something that I know some of you have participated in previous. I know Red Belly and Mike have.
Yeah,
So I've been cracking
Participated,
on.
failed. Yeah.
Oh, it's
I
not
was
a
thinking to
failure.
myself, I should have signed up for that this year.
I've worked on the War on Grey Plastic of increasing it.
Yeah. Got reinforcements. Yeah.
Yeah. So now I've been cracking away at the Necrons that I've got as well as some Deathwatch stuff. I've got Kill Team Cassius that I'm slowly churning through those veterans because those models are so damn detailed. They're gorgeous, but they are so painful because they take so long to paint.
Just one big brush should be fine. Yeah.
Just dip them in wash. You'd be good.
They're Deathwatch. They're black. Just spray them black.
Nah,
And a dot of white on the top. There, it shines.
but yeah, that's been what's on my hobby desk. I've only got a few games of 10th in as well recently too.
So that's a great segue into the battle reports. Well done, sir. And we have a battle report, and because it's only been a very short period since one, we've only got one full battle report, and it's none of the people here fought. It was Anthony taking on with his Custodies, taking on Chris with his Eldari. Everybody loves Eldari in 10th edition, and Custodies is also a favorite one. But there is, you check out the Facebook page. The battle report will be written up and put on there, so you'll be able to check that out. Do I want to give away the ending? Of course I do, because I'm that sort of person. It was a hard fought. Basically, it came down to Custodies taking all the secondaries, and Eldari just not, but killed a lot of people and still got a win. So, Eldari, there's an episode. How do we address Eldari? Oof. The only other battle report we got is one of the newest members to our ladder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was teaching my 12-year-old son how to play 10th edition, and also learning 10th edition myself in doing so. So it was a very, very slow game, where his Death Guard fighting against my Crimson Fists, actually, because I've been using the Marine side of Conquest since he only has the Death Guard side of Conquest. So I've not been using all my bullshit while I'm teaching him to play.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's a responsible parent type of thing.
Respectable.
Yeah. And it was interesting kind of coming to grips with the way line of sight through ruins and all that stuff works in the new game, and all those little changes that they've put in there. And basically we called it a draw because I had to cook dinner. And I was winning on VPs, but he and Typhus and a bunch of Death Shroud Terminators were about to do bad things to my Warlords, so I figured he was in a good position to take the lead back.
Nice. That's good. I think 10th feels like it's an addition to get new people involved. The mechanics of the game seem to flow a lot better, and it doesn't have the bloat yet. Or the codexes and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
And it's a lot easier to hand someone a stack of data cards, because I picked up the data cards and I was like, here, Alex, this is what's in your army. Here's your cards. And it was way easier for him than having to flip back and forth through the codex trying to find things.
That is very true. That is very handy. I think I've played a couple of games, and most of us have all played games now, so the game itself seems to go well. The longest part is learning your army. Yeah.
Even if you could beat someone to death with the Marine data cards.
Mm. Mm.
Well, you know, they got a lot of units.
Yeah, just
We
take out all the
do.
firstborn, you'll be fine.
Well, that's literally their excuse for why they're doing it, because there's too
Mhm.
many fucking units in the book.
There is. But they're going to add more. It's not like they're going to go away. Like what are we hearing? The
They're tagging
scouts
in.
will be changed to neophytes.
Hmm.
Yeah. So
Well, yeah, like
don't
like
throw
Black
out your
Templars
scouts yet,
have.
people. Yeah. And that's the idea. That would probably be a new unit. So all Marines can have something similar to that.
Yeah.
Use your scouts.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, yeah, there are too many. They do need to colour it a bit. Oh, you're going to add more. Well, yeah, that makes sense.
Well, I mean, look at the characters and how many different character variants there are in terms of like captain, for example. There's like
Yeah.
6.
Yeah, well, I think they should release a new lieutenant. It's been a while.
No, they should release lieutenant that's multi-part that they released in Augustus that hasn't actually been released, and it's going on what, 4 months now since they released the Augustus box.
Yeah, I was trying to pick up the
4 months and he
Brutalis
hasn't got a
Dreadnought
new
the other
model.
day, and I was like, oh, I can't actually get the Brutalis on its own.
No.
I was
That's a nice
really
model.
surprised by that.
Yeah, I hadn't picked up on the Augustus one. I knew it was still waiting for the Leviathan separate stuff, and so yeah, that'd be nice.
I reckon they're all going to come out together with the Marine Codex.
Yeah, probably.
It might have been different if the Marines had won the campaign, because as soon as the Tyranids won, all these new models have been in and out. So
Yeah, that's when we
they've
got
been
the
in the back
Thicta.
pocket. Yeah,
Mm.
the what?
The Thicta.
The Thicta. Yeah.
And the flesh cape. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't get that. Don't understand that cape.
Mm.
He wants to be fancy. That's all. Yeah. Don't they have their?
He's eaten enough heroes. He could just get a regular one.
Yeah, man. When you've absolutely positively got to skin every motherfucker in the room except no substitutes.
Brilliant. Well, that's our regular stuff. Nice, short and sweet, because it's only been a short period between 2 episodes. So we're going to do our short, non-advertised, non-payment break. Got that, Twitch? Thank you. And we're back and we'll talk the real stuff. Welcome back. Thank you for the people who have helped us make this podcast. No sponsorship, no financial gain. It's just for fun. Thank you. Now, to support us, though, you can support us with financial gains. We don't say no to that. That's okay. We didn't even pick a title of the old podcast. Must be Here's Scotty. No.
I mean, you could call it Interview with a TO.
We'll
Or
workshop
even
that. We'll
our
workshop.
first guest.
It's not our
No,
first
second
guest.
guest. That's right.
Yeah,
Second
yeah.
guest.
And we still haven't organised that band who's still interested in jumping on. to our
Today in
podcast.
Wobbly Player Syndrome, what's that Pokemon?
What's that guest?
So this came about, like, I've known Scotty for a while, and I've listened to some podcasts and YouTube channels and stuff. They're talking about what's been happening in the world with the tournaments and stuff like that. And I went, yeah, it's interesting. How is the tournament world in the 10th edition? If only I knew someone who'd have an insight to what's going on. So I asked Scotty, do you know anyone? That's been harsh.
And he said, of course I know someone. He's me.
it's. So we thought, well, we better get him on and get some professionalism and expertise onto the program. Sorry, regular listeners. But it's a great time. It's a new edition. We've just talked about how it seems to be an edition that anyone can get into if they're not familiar with it beforehand. The structure of the missions are very different. We've played a lot of Tempest of War, so it's not that different for us. And the structures of the armies themselves, it's pretty free for all with some very small limitations. So how does that all work? So that's why Scotty's here, and we have questions. I threw some questions. It's the professionalism that is our podcast. I threw all these questions down on a piece of paper. Scott went, yeah, let me organise that for you. So that's the professionalism we have around here.
At least it wasn't a beer coaster.
No. It was, I might have had a beer next to me, but that's not the point. But, so you've been now, I didn't realise that he was a tournament, or I didn't clue on that you've been a tournament organiser longer than you've been a Twitch streamer. So he's going, yeah, I've been doing this for ages. But, what? because I knew you were broadcasting. What's the right word there? Covering through Twitch, other tournaments. But you weren't organising those ones. You were just the media, right?
Primarily, no. I was just the content creator on site, the pundit, the commentator, whatever you would prefer to use as the term for that kind of role.
I got to ask, the shirt you wear, as gorgeous as it is that a choice? Is that your marketing shirt?
No, that is personal choice. So if you look at any of the Games Workshop streams where they have guys like Paul Murphy or Nick Nartavati, they're always in suits and they've always got loud shirts. And so to kind of be like, well, if they're doing it, why don't I?
Yeah.
And having previous experience in menswear and retail, I was like, I got plenty of loud shirts. Easy.
Now, I have put your social link up on the chat, and I will do it again throughout the thing. But please make sure you are listening, and we'll also you'll say it out loud to people who are listening to the podcast, because it's hard for reading when it's only the ears. Yeah, but we'll put that link there. Absolutely. So, if you've been being a tournament organizer longer than I know, how did you start? Why are you a tournament organizer, and how did you start?
Okay, so I'm not originally from Canberra. I moved to Canberra for uni back in 2014. And this was, I think, 18 months before Jolt opened was when I moved down. I think Jolt opened 2015 from memory, or it could have been 2016, one of those two years. And so I rocked up to Jolt a few times, played fantasy back in the day with a mate of mine that I knew through other means, and then started playing in the 40k community quite regularly. One of the local guys was running some leagues at the time, and I jumped in, and then he was looking to find someone to pass it on. And so I kind of went, yeah, I'd be interested in helping out and running it. And so I jumped on and started running the leagues. But a little bit before that, I think when I ran my first official tournament, how I went about it was I literally went into Jolt one day. I think it was like a Wednesday or something. I introduced myself to the owner, which is Lewis. Great guy. Jolt's an amazing story. If you haven't seen it on Facebook in terms of the images, it is probably the best store in Australia, I would say, from what I've seen, hands down. In terms of the play space, the tables are at waist height rather than like thigh height, so you're not
saves
having
you
to
back.
Yes. And so I just introduced myself, said I'd be interested in running some 40k tournaments. Like, how do we want to go about it? It was like, yeah, no dramas. Like, this is how we'll do it. We had a chat. And so I ran my first tournament at Jolt for 40k. I believe from memory I got like 12 players or something like that. And it was a June event in preparation for WinterCon. And I think from memory it was either 2015, 2016, because I've got a few dates in my head where I know certain milestones of when I've run tournaments and such.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to say your memory so far. I'm going, what did I have for breakfast? Come on. Jeez, you remember things from.
Yeah, so that's really how I started to get into it, was just I offered to put it on for the community, Jolt being a relatively new store, and I was like, oh, nobody's jumped in to run some 40k tournaments, may as well step up. And I'd been playing 40k at that point for about when did I start? 2008, so it was probably about 8 years or so, 8-9 years. So I did have a lot of 40k play experience under my belt, but I did want to kind of give back to the community and be like, look, there's a new store, let's put on some events, let's get a community growing there as well. And then over time, just kept on running events. We ran the first, if you know what the ITC is, or it was back then called the Independent Tournament Circuit, it is now called the International Tournament Circuit, run by Frontline Gaming, which is the main international competitive circuit, ranking points. It's got tens of thousands of players across the globe that play in events. And they do the end of year event at the Las Vegas Open, which is Frontline Gaming's major finishing event for the season for the ITC, and they get over 1,000 players now at that event every year.
Crazy.
And so it's a part of that circuit. I ran the first ITC event in Australia in September of 20, I believe it was 2015. And so, and we had 17 players. It got featured on Frontline Gaming's website, and it was really good. to get some coverage and have, you know, that many guys. We had guys travel down from Newcastle to come and play in it as well, and like they trekked a long way to play, and it was good. It was really great. Then 2016 was really when the ITC kind of started to really grow in Australia. A lot of other places got interested and started running ITC events. And then come to CanCon 2017, I'd run a couple of WinterCons and I'd played at a couple of CanCons. And the CanCon organizer for the 2016 one said, I've spoken to CGS. I've said, you're probably the guy to take it on next year. I'm like, all right, no dramas. So I took it over. And we ran the first Australian, now it's called the South Pacific, but the Australian ITC Championships in 2017 from memory. And that got, I believe it was 80 players. And we had a cap of 100 and we got 80 players at it. And that was kind of like my minimum goal is if we got 80, I was happy and we got it. And I was super pumped because the previous two CanCons before that, we had 56 and then 48 players.
Cool. Yeah, so that's a pretty substantial jump to 80.
Yeah. So that was kind of, I was starting to get involved with knowing other TOs across New South Wales and Victoria and started talking and trying to organize some things. Then unfortunately had some community issues locally here in the ACT with a group of players that no longer play 40K. And they pretty much stabbed me in the back, to be fair. And I took a step back. I took a massive step back from running tournaments. I said, I don't need this drama in my life. I was still at uni. And I just stepped back. That was still when I was also working at Jolt. I'd started working at Jolt at that point in time. And I went, no, I'm just going to focus on running stuff at the store and making sure there's events for not just 40K, but also Age of Sigmar, running Magic events and such there as well. Making sure the 40K leagues were still going and keeping on going. They were pretty good. They'd ebb and flow. Like you'd have drop-offs throughout the league, of course. But then we come into 8th and it was a pretty big slow grow when we kicked that off. We had about 60 to 70 players sign up for that one. So that was very big in terms of that league. And then, you know, obviously over time, I ended up leaving Jolt. I took a break from 40K entirely. Had other life things that I was looking after and needing a break from 40K. Went into Magic, playing Magic there instead. And then I came back to 40K a little bit just after I got married or around when I was getting married in 2019.
Yeah, they'll drive anyone to 40K. Yep.
And so I got a bit more back into it, you know, doing the hobby. That's when I started doing the War on Grey Plastic Challenge for myself. And then after all the COVID stuff happened in Canberra, we were quite fortunate. We weren't as locked down as a lot of other cities and states in the country. So we were still able to regularly hold the leagues and such. There weren't as many tournaments, like they did happen. So there was other organisers locally that did decide to run them. And then kind of recently, I jumped back into running the leagues end of last year to kind of give Mark, who's one of the full-time employees at Jolt, a bit of a break because he'd been running it after I'd stopped. And then also one of the guys who was running the single-day tournaments, he then moved. So then I jumped in with a group of guys that I'm coordinating with to run the one-days at Jolt for the Grim series. And yeah, the rest is kind of that. That's kind
living
of
the life.
That's kind of the history of me as a TO. So I've run some relatively large events. I've attended larger events than I've run. But yeah, that's kind of like what I have done in terms of my TOing history. And the reason why genuinely is just to serve the community. Because I'm the type of person that if someone's not there doing something already, I'm happy to step up to the plate and say, I'm happy to not play so that you guys can all play. And I'd rather facilitate that rather than try and run the tournament at the same time as playing in the tournament. And I've got some professional opinions about that as a TO as well.
Yeah, I do the same. If I see someone, especially if they got our diary, I'd rather not play. I'll let you play. No, that sounds great. That's fantastic. So, tournament organizer. So there's, as you said, you've got a one-day tournament, you've got a league, and you've got multi-day tournaments.
Mm-hmm.
What's involved? I don't know. Where do you start with that? I mean, you just sort of put your hand up and said, yeah, I'll look after that. I'm assuming it's not as easy as, yeah, I'll look after that. and
No.
just plug and play. Yeah.
It a lot of people think it is. And if you want to do it successfully, and I think as a TO, personally, there's a professionalism you have to come about with it.
And a loud shirt.
I don't necessarily wear loud shirts when I'm TOing. I prefer the
Yeah.
comfort fit nowadays. The South Pacific ITC Champs, when I ran it, though, that's a different story. No, so when it comes to running a tournament, there can be a lot of varying factors involved when you go to run it. It can really depend on whether you're running in a local store or if you're running it through a gaming club or you're starting up a gaming club to facilitate those kind of events. So really, in general, the bare minimum that a lot of players do expect is a players pack. That includes all the necessary information, your schedule for the weekend, the points limits, the army building rules, what FAQs are in use if you're using external FAQs like the WTC FAQ,
Sorry, WTC?
World Team Championships, which
Thank
is
you.
actually happening at the moment. And I will say, for those of you who do not know, Australia won last year. And we are defending champions over there this year. The guys are already on the ground. They're setting up for the War Master singles event, which is starting in the next couple of days. And then the WTC to follow next week, this coming weekend. So it's going to be a big thing. I know a lot of competitive guys. We're all rooting for the guys over in Belgium. And it should be a good time to see those guys do well. So the players pack, it has your payment info, how much an event costs now. That'll vary. Most 40K events, if they are being run, will either be 1, 2, or 3 days. We haven't seen any that are over 4 days, at least here in Australia.
Oh, God.
The only event that I know that is 4 days is the Nova Open in the US that is run in September. And they previously have run 4 days, primarily because they do an open GT. And they do an invitational tournament. And the majority of the invitational players will also play in the GT. And they don't have both running simultaneously.
Okay, right. So they're there for 4 days because they want to be but play 2 different comps, essentially.
Yep. It works out to be about 13 to 14 games of 40K in those 4 days. It is brutal.
I'm just looking at the faces of these other 3 here, and they're going 13 to 14 games of 40K, and look at the excitement in their faces.
I would be flat out even getting like 4 games.
Yeah, by the end of CanCon, I used to just be like, I'm just gonna curl up in bed now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So once you figure out how many days you're going, if it's at a store, sometimes most of the time, at least in my experience, the store will take a cut of the entry fee. That is just to go back to the store. They might provide you the terrain. Some stores might not, or you've got guys that do bring their terrain to help you run the event. As 40K terrain can be quite necessary in the format that it's in to help with the current issues in 10th edition, which we'll get into.
Yes.
And some members of the community are willing to help out in that regard, which is awesome. Obviously table space, knowing how many tables you're able to have really does determine your capacity. So at Jolt, for example, we're able to have 16 tables at most, which means we've actually got a capacity of 32 players. And that's kind of what we run for the 1 days for the Grim series. The cost of that is $30. So what we'll do is then Jolt takes their cut, and then the rest of that goes back into the prize pool. Sometimes we also do save a bit from the prize pool to actually go and purchase terrain for the community as well. So that is one way you can handle things if you're wanting to get better terrain for your local community. And then it's up to the TO whether you do list submission or not. Generally, if it's 2 or 3 day tournament, tournament organizers will ask for list submissions, so they're able to make sure everyone's running a legal list. There's nothing that, no one's running an extra 100 points. No one's running more than 3 or 6 units in their list now. They're not running more allies than they should, things like that. And it's the TO's responsibility. He may have a couple of people that aren't playing in that tournament that will check lists. And then you need a software. Now, the most prevalent software at the moment is Best Coast Pairings. They came onto the scene way back in 2017, and they have become the most commonly used pairing software. it's not just used for 40k, it's used for Age of Sigmar, it's used for Magic, all these different games that you can use Best Coast pairings for. There are other softwares out there. I actually started off with using just Excel myself
Fair enough.
and Google Sheets
For 80
the
people,
leagues.
why wouldn't you?
Not for 80. We did BCP for the 80.
Yeah.
Now, this was back when BCP had server issues, and CanCon was the same weekend as LVO. And LVO was around 500 players that year. So
Yeah.
you can imagine what the servers were like. And so BCP crashed around 2 for us. But that was years and years ago. It's a lot better than what it was back then. And that's why I ran a backup at the time, because I was like, if BCP goes down, we're screwed. So I had a backup, and I used WarScore. So it's a Java-based program, a lot more customizable, but you have to know how to customize it when you're going to go use it. The other thing that a lot of TOs will consider is how to do your prizes. So, are you doing first, second, third? Are you going to include just a best general, so the first place? Are you going to do something that's called the Renaissance Man or Woman, which is the person who has the highest battle score and the highest hobby score combined? Best sportsmanship. You could do Wood Spoon. You can do Lucky Door prizes. If you want to do something we came up here with in Canberra, actually, was we called it Mediocre Man, the person who is smack bang in the middle. So say you've got 17 players at a tournament. It was the 9th player.
Look at the glint in the guy's eyes here. Ooh, middle of the road per player. I can get that one.
Yeah, that sounds like a new competition for the middle.
Yeah.
I've got to win this one to get back to the middle. Hang on.
Yep. And then generally a few other things is like models. So if people are wanting to run 3D prints or converted miniatures or counts as or proxies, more often than not, it's best practice to actually email the TO and go, hey, this is what I'm wanting to run. And generally the TO will specify how that works in the players pack as well. So for the Grim series at Jolt, we actually have a rule that no more than 25% of your army can be 3D prints or alternate sculpts. They can't be IP infringing of Games Workshop either. And so that's the other thing that we keep in, mainly because we want to support the store and that they sell 40k products. We want people to be using 40k products from Games Workshop. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, well, we want to save money. Yes, it is an expensive hobby here in Australia, and that's why it's up to 25% you can have those 3D prints, and that's only for whole 3D prints. So if you have like 3D printed shoulder pads, that's fine. It's more the full models that are the issue.
I'm making a full model out of shoulder pads now.
Yeah, so and like kit bashes are fine, just not like full proxies.
Yeah, and so it's even if you are, always best to just ask the TO, and sure, the TO might get 50 million questions, but I think in my personal opinion as a TO, it's always better to ask than not. Because if you don't ask and you get there at the event and you find out it's an issue, then you're up shit creek. But if you do your due diligence as a player and you clear it with the TOs ahead of time, you can grab the email or the Facebook message if your opponent has an issue and go, look, I've cleared this with the TO, show them the message or the email, and then that stops any issues.
Yeah, I remember people getting into a stink at the CanCon when Space Wolves had just got Thunder Wolves, but there wasn't a Thunder Wolf model.
Yep.
And it was the base size argument.
Yes. That is the other one, is that a lot of different units in 40k have got different base sizes.
So how much of an impact does a base size actually have in competitive?
Well, that one, it was like the character has a really big base.
Yeah.
And they were like, well, he's the only extant model. But a lot of people showed up with proxies that were on bike bases, so they could fit through gaps that the character couldn't.
So it's more the gap in the terrain side of things.
Yeah.
I was going to say, but you're a bit closer to the enemy, but I'm also closer to the enemy.
Well, the other thing is that it affects cover and stuff too.
Yes. Yeah. Also, unit coherency is the other thing to consider, because if you have got a smaller footprint, you're able to fit models through places a lot easier. You're able to string them out a lot more. Or if you've actually got larger bases, it could mean... Now, larger bases are not necessarily considered what we call modeling for advantage. If you've got smaller bases, generally it can be considered that, unless they are the bases that the models originally came with. Although, for example, if you're a Space Marine player, and yes, I'm going to call myself out here because I've got over 200 Marines that I need to put on 32s that are still on 25s.
Yeah.
Generally, you want to make sure that they're on the base size that they're currently being released with, if at all possible.
Because I was about to ask what happens with when GW decides that it's now a 32 mil base is required, and you have 400 poxwalkers that do it. I'm not changing those.
Well, depending on how sexily you've based them, you used to be able to get like clip-ons that clipped around the 25 to bulk it out to 32.
Yep, those still exist. The other way, and this is probably the method I'm going to do it because I've got a bunch of 32s, I'm just going to shave off the sides so I keep the basing, and then I'm just going to put them on a 32 and then fix up the rest of the basing and done.
Yep.
That's what I did with
I like it.
my 30k breaches, because I started building my 30k army before the 32s came with the models.
Yep.
And I was just like, I just cut the edges off and glued them onto the top of a 32.
Yeah, I've got like 100 boys for orcs, and it'd be like, and they're on the small original 15s, whatever. And it's like, I don't really want to put a brand new base on these. It'd be a nightmare.
Yep.
So yeah, thanks for it's great then.
I've got the old Gorkamorka ones, and they were just.
I was going to
say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I could see people abusing bigger bases too, because you can screen better from deep strike and stuff when you do that.
Yeah, nowadays that is correct. So if you've got bigger bases, depending on the unit size, you can actually string it further. And so, you've got to make sure as best as possible they've got the right size.
Yeah, because I could see people doing like Hormagaunts and putting them on like 32s and then just having this conga line that just covers the map.
Yeah, no, 32. When you said Hormagaunts, I'm going, put them on the 50 mil base. They'd be great.
Funnily enough, the new Hormagaunts, I believe, on 28.5s. So,
What?
Yeah.
Well, they did have problems standing up, so I do support that.
And the Hormagaunts are actually getting new sculpts. They did get previewed to get new sculpts.
Yeah, they do look amazing.
A little bit of a tangent. The minute that I saw Termagaunts in the Leviathan box, I'm like, they better bloody well do Hormagaunts. Otherwise, Tyranny players aren't going to be happy.
Yeah, I
did check for both of that because I was like, they got both kinds.
Yeah.
I'm
not buying them, but you know.
I found my metal Hormagaunts when I was like cleaning my shed, and man, none of those guys fucking stand up. They all fall over.
Yeah. It's just blue tack to keep them in the spot, wasn't it? And
they're all like flinging themselves into the air, and they're on these little tiny bases.
It's like the Storm Boys for orcs. They never stood on right.
Yeah.
So you just wind up with a pile of models on the table.
Yeah.
That's how I play.
Yeah. And so when you get to the next part in actually running the day, you need to do a play briefing at the start. Generally, you'll announce what the missions you're using either ahead of time. You might do a mission pack specifically for those as well. I know that there is the Leviathan GT pack that some tournament organizers will reference. They'll say they'll pick missions A, B, and C, for example, from that. I think there's 15 missions in that pack. If a TO decides to use deploy servo skulls as a primary mission, the players are not going to be happy.
No.
So, and then, you just put a round timer on. So what that'll consist of is you set that up in the schedule. So if you say you're doing probably minimums 2.5 hour rounds is the minimum expected for competitive 40k nowadays, but anywhere between 2.5 to 3 hours is usually pretty good. A lot of places in Australia do between that time. I know the States do prefer 2 hours 45 more commonly. So it does vary geographically as well in Australia. You got the guys over in WA, they will do things very differently to the way the guys in New South Wales or up in Queensland will do things. But it is starting to become a little bit more homogenized and a little bit more unified in that sense. And then throughout the day, if you get rules questions, you answer them as a TO. You look at your resources. I always like to have my rule book and access to my tablet that I run BCP on. I can pull up any of the index cards now for 10th edition and go, all right, what's the rules? And also players are expected to bring everything they need for the game, so they should have their rules. They should have their dice, tape measure, objective markers, that kind of thing to actually play the game. And so if you look at the rules, you look at your rule book, and you just kind of facilitate and you answer the rules questions as best as possible. A bit of a best practice I also have is I keep a TO book. where I'll write down any rules questions I get, the answers that I've given. So then any events I run in the future, if there's not an FAQ for that question, I will actually maintain the same
Build
ruling.
one. Nice.
And then, you give players updates on their time. Generally, say you're doing 2.5 hours, you'll say, all right, hour and a half to go in the round, let everyone know. Then you'll do an hour. You might do 45 minutes, but you don't necessarily have to. You could do half an hour, but I definitely recommend doing half an hour, 15 minutes, and 10 minutes. And then 5 minutes as well, and then dice down. And usually it's a pretty hard dice down. And you'll find that sometimes players won't get full games in. They might get to turn 3, turn 4 in that time.
So what happens then? Because we're not the quickest players of the game.
Yeah, because I was going to even ask about things like scheduling in lunch, because we're really bad for never, ever eating. And then you get hangry people at 4 in the afternoon.
Yeah, so to answer Greg's question first, and then I'll get back to yours, Mark. So when it comes to if dice go down in terms of like on the schedule, you've set a specific time of things that have to happen. And if you're not able to get those scores in on time, you might be able to notify the players of what the next round is in time for that round to start, and it can have a knock-on effect for the rest of the day. It does happen in smaller events. If you're running, say, a combat patrol tournament or a 1,000-point tournament, and you're running 4 or 5 rounds in a day, if at round 3 after lunch, people are, taking their time entering their scores, and it takes 10 minutes for people to get them scores in, that 10 minutes then knocks back the schedule by another 10 minutes total, and say you need to be out of the store by a particular time, and you've got half an hour at the end to do prizes and pack up, it means that you're then down to 20 minutes for that. So being really hard can be dependent on the venue you're in.
Yeah.
So when that happens... generally, players will finish at the most common point. So if they've just started a new turn, which generally they shouldn't, you always, when you do those 15, 5, and 10, I always say make sure you finish on even turns, which means that both players actually get their side of the turn. If they decide to start and someone gets to turn 4 and someone doesn't, I think the preference always is to go back to the end of turn 3 scoring, because it's unfair otherwise. Or if they're able to go through and actually get the other player's turn 4 done relatively quickly by talking it through. It's not the best practice for players to do that, and talking through games is normally not too common practice. Some people do it when there is time pressure and they need to know those scores, but at the same time, it's something that TOs don't necessarily like players doing, and I personally don't like players doing it either.
Yeah, it's not encouraged, but sometimes it just happens.
Yes, and so you get the scores. They should be at where it is at the point of the game. So for example, if it ends turn 3, the player who goes second doesn't get to score at the end of their turn. They get to score at the top of their command phase for their primary, for example. So applying those rules consistently is important when games do finish early. And then in terms of the schedule, as to Mark's question about scheduling lunch, yes, you always should schedule in lunch. Otherwise, you do get crabby players. You don't want guys, say you start at 8 a.m. in the morning and you got a 3-hour round, or you start at 9 and you got a 3-hour round, and then you don't do lunch and you go straight into round 2. People are going to be hungry by the end of that game. Always at minimum half an hour for lunch. If you can stretch it out to 45 minutes or an hour, depending on where you're at. And depending on the day of a tournament. Normally keep it consistent if you're running it over multiple days, however.
Especially if you're playing it in like a big sweltering bloody hall at CanCon.
Yes.
People need drinks.
Yes.
Do you have a dress code? Do they have to keep their clothes on at these tournaments? Because there's been a few years at CanCon that has not always been the case.
So generally that's more of a depends on the venue. If it's a game store, obviously. But if it's, say, for example, at CanCon, there's actually, as the TO, yes, you're somewhat responsible for that. But at the same time, there are actually convention organisers that are the ones that should be enforcing those rules. So it does depend on the venue, but more often than not, yes. The bare minimum, and I understand why it can get sweltering hot in Canberra at CanCon, in 40-degree heat. I know, I've played in it. It sucks. It should be like bare minimum players, thongs, shorts, singlet, bare minimum.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean,
just-
thongs on your feet for your overseas people.
yes, flip flops for you Americans out there.
Jan-
I'm wearing the
Um,
Nurgle shirt, not the Slanesh shirt.
Yeah. So yeah, but also like just in general, it's always good to practice good personal hygiene when you're playing at tournaments as well. Just so then you're able to give your, you're able to be presentable when you're playing at events, and you're not causing your opponent any discomfort.
I believe we had an episode talking about the do's and don'ts at tournaments, and I believe that was raised.
Actually, I think that was just in general.
In general?
In general.
You're playing at my place, anything goes, mate. Cameras aren't always on.
I think there was like a topical thing
Or are they?
that month,
Yeah.
wasn't it? Like, didn't like a tournament announce they were going to be banning players if they didn't wear deodorant or something?
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah.
Yeah, it's starting
Yeah.
to become a bit more structured into the code of conduct for events.
Hmm.
So I got millions of questions, but I want the others to make their noises. All right, so I'll ask questions then. All right. I just want to go back on some of the organisation. When you mentioned terrain, how do you define the terrain setup for a tournament? Is there a set way? Like, does that left-hand corner have to be the same as the top right-hand corner? And I've pointed the opposite directions because that's my math.
So it depends on the event. Take for example, I was up at the Steel City Showdown, which was a 5-player teams event up in Newcastle 2 and a bit weeks ago, and they're running the WTC terrain format. What that means is that the World Team Championships have got a curated set of table layouts that the players are playing on. Now, in a teams format, the players actually get to choose what level of density in terms of terrain that they can play on, and they've got a set amount of how many of each of those tables they have access to. So you could go down that route. Sometimes, at Jolt, we don't necessarily have terrain maps because the terrain is so varied.
Yep.
So it's generally common practice in those instances to make terrain as symmetrical as possible. So that, there might be one difference or two differences on either deployment side to give players that opportunity to think, is this deployment going to be better for me, or is the other one? And then that way it does give some tactical thinking, but also in some of the heavier competitive events, tournaments will do their own terrain maps. Like I believe the Dice Arcade GT in February that we were at did their own terrain maps as well. And so that was how, and it just depends on the event. So generally, if it's a 2-day event and terrain is consistent, like you're able to have the same terrain across all tables, more often than not, you'll employ either the same terrain setup principles or you'll do terrain maps. And you'll have that on the table so players can set up the terrain for that mission. If you're using the variety of different deployments, you want to make sure that the terrain is not going to be advantageous for the person going first on particular deployments. If you just have, this is the setup for the entire day, and you go through, okay, we're playing Dawn of War, Table Quarters, and Hammer and Anvil. Each of those deployments will require a different type of rotation on the terrain to actually mean that line of sight is obscured. There's not massive fire lanes from deployment to deployment. Yes, angles can be gotten, but you need to move and to get to those. Things like that is something you take into consideration, because you don't want a player, if it can be avoided, to get blown away turn one and have 2/3 of their army killed, and it's like, cool, I'm already out of this game. Like, as a TO, that's just a poor player experience, and you want to provide the best player experience as possible.
So I guess 10th edition probably kind of helps with that, with the way terrain works, in that where terrain is very descriptive and it doesn't matter so much what the terrain looks like. Like, a ruin is a ruin. As long as the ruin is the same length, it still blocks line of sight. It doesn't matter where the windows are. Previously, you could draw line of sight through a window, whereas now you can't. So as long as it's the same size ruin, it's got the same rules. So I guess that would help with that?
Yes and no. So this is where we were talking a bit earlier about terrain and rules. Towering is currently a massive problem, because the way that Titanic used to work in 9th edition was that if you're a Titanic model, you couldn't see through ruins, but units could see through you. They've now removed that with towering, so now you can see through ruins despite, as long as you got true line of sight, doesn't matter whether it's obscuring or anything, you can still see through it. And so they've taken away that safety barrier for, infantry, for vehicles that aren't Titanic, monstrous creatures, all that kind of stuff. Which means that knights, Imperial Knights, we've seen Wraith Knights in Eldari, also... I believe there's one other faction that's doing quite well.
Oh, the Imperial Knights are very high up in the success.
Yeah, I was about to say
Yeah.
that explains why the Knights are rated so high if they can ignore
Yes.
terrain
Chaos Knights
to wreck
aren't
you.
been as successful as the
They're
Imperial Knights.
not as strong.
Yeah.
So Knights, their faction rule of being able to reroll a hit roll and a wound roll is quite strong. And their Knight tenants, I can't remember the proper name for them, but yeah, Imperial Knights are doing a lot better than what Chaos Knights are currently because of their faction rules and the disparity there. But yeah, an Eldari on top of that with Wraith Knights before the Fate dice change, you were seeing players using multiple sixes on a Wraith Knight to do a ridiculous amount of mortal wounds through their heavy D cannons. And so by being able to see through terrain, whilst yes, in some games it's not a problem, in others it is. Most commonly, if players and TOs don't actually have the terrain to block at least the bottom floor on all of their ruins, they will actually put in a stipulation at the start of the event going, yep, all ruins, for example, the first floor, even if it's got windows, are line of sight blocked. It doesn't matter if you can actually see through. You just play it as though you cannot see through them to actually give infantry and other vehicles and stuff actual cover and protection from the towering models. And that seems to be helping. However, it is one of the poorly written rules of 10th edition.
Yeah, I was with you, Mike. I thought it was improved, but again, not playing tournaments. So, because I know Knight had overcomplicated terrain. Thought, oh, they've made it simple. And then we started playing and going, actually, no, they haven't made it simple.
I liked that it was customizable, but it was so customizable that you had to have that.
Too far. Yeah.
It was like to have your 10 minutes of negotiation at the start of the game to establish how the terrain works this game.
Yeah. And so
then my 2.5 hours is up and dice down. Son of a bitch.
Yeah. And something else that's come a bit more commonplace because of the new terrain rules is actually basing. So if you look at, say, the Adelaide Uprising terrain, which is now the Australian South Pacific Championships, a lot of their terrain just has the small profiles of the walls. They don't actually have the full bases. Following what Games Workshop have done with their terrain maps in the Leviathan GT pack, as well as the WTC, they've actually got expanded bases for those ruins. It's now a lot more commonplace that we're going back to larger bases for those ruins.
Well, I don't mind that at all. I think that's a good thing because then you've got a clear understanding. This is the footprint of that. Am I in it or am I not? Especially with that rule. If I'm half in it, I can't shoot you, but you can shoot me.
Yeah, footprint is incredibly important in 10th.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I got no issues with that at all. You three should need to ask some questions.
So, so, have you had to deal with cheating players, and what did you do?
Yes, because we've heard.
So there's a couple of documents I referred to a bit earlier about the code of conduct. Generally, this is where you kind of identify penalties. The most common one in use is the ITC code of conduct. Currently, the way that most tournaments and most larger events, and we do it at the Grim series as well, is we work on a card system, very much like soccer. So for the first offense, and I'll clarify this by saying that sometimes it will be a player decorum issue. It could be a unintentional issue, like someone just misplays a rule. We don't necessarily call that cheating. That's just an unintentional misplay, but it is still considered a foul. It's still considered a cardable offense. Or you can have someone just down and outright cheating. It could also be someone arguing with the rules judge over a ruling that they've given and just arguing their point constantly. If you've seen a video done by Stephen Box of Vanguard Tactics that he was in, he had pretty much scooped his models off the table because of a French player who was consistently doing that.
Yeah.
To
I watched that one too. Yeah.
Yeah, to
was,
actual Games Workshop judges, and Mike Brandt was there as well. So the head of organized play for Games Workshop. And so it's really the way I do it, and I know different events will do it differently, is that first yellow card, okay, cool, this is your warning. Like, there's not going to be anything done. You've just got a yellow card. So you need to be careful about how you behave or how you play for the remainder of the event. If they get 2 yellow cards, it then becomes a red card. And this can be different depending on the event. Some events will go, if you get a red card, you're just disqualified. You're done. They eject you from the tournament. You're done. No refund, no nothing. My opinion is a little bit different when it comes to at least the Grim series. I like to do it where, okay, that game is going to be a game loss. You're going to get 0 points for that game. You're also then going to be disqualified from prizes. This is your last warning, effectively. Then if there's still an issue, they get another card, then it's a disqualification. You're out. No refund. That is still considered to be because it's still a yellow, but it's on top of a red. So that's final. So at most, in my eyes, a player can get 3 cards. And
I was going to say, you go with Formula One. What is it? The black card.
Yeah, I was going to say the black card to be next. Yeah.
Goodbye.
Yeah, that, or you insert an orange card in between.
Yeah. And so depending on the level of infraction or foul, you might have to give a player a red card straight away. If you catch them intentionally cheating in a game, if they're using loaded dice, that's an immediate ejection. And then
they've just got to dump it in the toilet. They'll never get caught.
No, so funny story about that one. They got found and caught with that before they went and done it, and the guy did it
crazy.
As his opponent was going to get salt to do the salt bath. And they still came up as the 1 and the 6 in the toilet. Anyway, and so it's really on the TOs or the judges' discretion. Now, depending on the size of a tournament, you may also have judges that are helping you, because and my personal opinion is, for every 32 players, you should have an additional TO or judge. So if you're running 64, you should have 2 of you. If you're running 96, there's 3, etc., etc. So then that way, you're not having to run around to multiple people to make rules calls or deal with issues and such as well. I personally have had to deal with play decorum issues most of the time. I haven't really had any rules infractions. It's more been play decorum, whether it's been, they've shown disrespect towards myself as a TO, or, 2 players have actually, not gotten along and they've almost come to blows. It's kind of like, all right, both of you's yellow card, both of you's step away. Just as an example. Because
get him some lunch, man. Come on.
But also saying that happened around 8 at CanCon one year. So
8 in the morning.
No, round 8.
Get him.
That's the
round
last
8.
round.
8 in the morning. Get him some coffee. That might calm him down.
And so really it can be the TO's discretion, and generally if you're using the ITC code of conduct, you'll say it in your players pack, look, we're following the ITC code of conduct, or if you're following something differently, you'll say it in your players pack. Just so then players know what's going on and the way that things will work if this does happen. And I'm always a firm believer of, Stephen Box's philosophy. Always ask your opponent, if you think something's too good, always ask to see the rule. Because if you don't, and then the player, that player is playing it incorrectly, and I've actually,
especially if they're not knowing they're not playing it correctly.
Yes,
they'll never learn from that.
Yeah. And I've seen it happen many a times. It's been unintentional, and that's happened. And having to talk with the TO if I'm covering the event, or being the TO myself and having to go, hey, that's not how that rules work. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to give you a yellow card for this. It's no penalty, because I understand you believe the rule was playing a different way compared to that. But going forward, please play it the correct way.
How dare you force that on them?
But yeah,
well, just the old man. That's really good. Can I see that? Can I see that in the codex?
Yeah. Oh, look, there's been games that I've gone. We've had a game, and then I'll send a message. Adam, I got that rule wrong. Sorry, mate, and things like
My,
that. Well,
my response is, Jesus, there's my win. No.
yeah. I make
No,
sure it's after it's been recorded. I have to let you know.
absolutely. So I love playing my games, Scotty, and the fear of playing a tournament actually scares the Jesus out of me.
Right.
Do you get a lot of new players coming in and wanting to play tournaments, but then don't know how to play tournaments? I'm just more like that. That's like my first. I want to play a tournament, but I don't want to be the play against the min
bunny.
maxer and just get wiped. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in my experience, I've been in that position. I've played my first tournament when I was 18. It was a
Mhm.
small, we called it Gong Hammer way back. It was 2013. I think we had like 16 players, if that, at that event, and I was
Sorry.
wooden spoon.
When you were 18, 2013.
Sorry, 18, 2013. Yeah. Yes.
All right.
That
Bringing some
tells
youth
you.
into the podcast. Thank you. That'll be our demographic.
And so, I know what it's like to be a new player playing at an event for the first time. And unfortunately, you will find the players that are the strong players. And sometimes you will get paired into them. And my advice in that situation is play your game. Play the game that you want to play as best as possible. Most of the guys in Canberra, I can speak for the majority of them, are really good guys. Even the top players, the majority are great guys. And so, you will have a pleasant game against them. Even though they might be absolutely flogging the living crap out of you in the game, they're going to do it and make sure you have an enjoyable time. They'll make sure they're communicating and talking through how things are working, why things are working if you don't know that combination, or, you haven't played against that faction before. Because, it's better to communicate that so you also learn, because coming to a tournament for the first time, it might be like, oh, I've only played against a small group of friends, for example, here. You got Mike and Mark and Greg for yourself, Adam, and it's just like, you might be only used to playing against a certain amount of factions, and you might go into something, say, like Gene Stealer Cults. We have maybe one Gene Stealer Cult player locally, and so hardly anyone locally knows how to play into them. And so you might play into it and go, I actually don't know how this army functions. Can you explain it to me? And it's kind of the thing that you have that conversation at the start of the game going, hey, I'm relatively new. This is like my first tournament. I'm sorry. You might say, I'm sorry if I take long to go through my stuff. I'm sorry if we don't get a full game in. But I'm still learning. I'm still, and just having that conversation as well is always a good thing. To be open and transparent. And the general thing that a lot of players do like to do, and it's starting to become more of a thing, but I think players are leaning a bit too much into it, is playing by intent as well. It's saying, okay, I'm going to move this here, so then I've got a 9-inch charge, and measuring that out in your movement phase, for example, things like that. But playing that in the good way. But in general, a lot of people you'll play at tournaments are, not there to take names effectively and play for sheep stations. There'll be maybe 5 to 10% that genuinely are there to do that. Some of them want to do well and want to play the best game that they can, but they also want to have fun. And because, if you win and you're not having fun, then what's the point, in my personal opinion? So that's something to always keep in mind.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you get many of the win at all costs players at the tournaments?
It depends on the tournament. I think if it's, say, for example, it is the Adelaide Uprising, it's the Australian ITC South Pacific Championships. It's the final event of the season where you've got 300 to 400 ITC points on the line that can determine first place. Players will play hard and they will not hold back. And sometimes players can lose a little bit of player decorum because of that. I think it depends on the event you're playing in. So if you're playing in a Grim Series event, for example, they're casually competitive, and we make sure to advertise it that way, because we don't want people coming in and just absolutely kicking everyone in the nads for points at the end of the day. It's not ranked. We only do the ACT rankings for it, and even then the ACT rankings are super casual at the same time. So it's really about welcoming new people into the scene and having them play in tournaments. Like, we had a handful of guys playing at their first tournament at the Grim Series 2 weeks ago. And it was great to see, and everyone had a great time. There was a lot of veterans there as well who were like, yep, you know, getting games in and just having fun. But everyone had a great time, and everyone made sure that everybody had a great time. And that's the thing, is like, you want people walking away having a positive player experience. And as players, and this is advice to everybody, if you ever played a tournament, never be afraid to go and talk to a TO and say, hey, I just haven't had the best game against this person. Their attitude wasn't the greatest, like their player decorum just, you know, they were a bit abrasive, you know, they were a bit argumentative when rules came up and things like that. Always, if you feel like that and it's maybe your first tournament, always tell a TO, because a TO cannot see everything in a room. They can only be in one place at one point in time. And so if you actually go and tell them, even if it's after the fact, they might be able to go, hey, okay, no worries, sorry that that's happened. You know, if anything else happens throughout the weekend, please just come and tell me. And then you can actually keep an eye on that going forward as well. You can keep an eye on that player if it's a potential issue. If it is a significant problem, it's a yellow card. It could turn into a yellow card for that player as well. So that is just some other things to bear in mind.
No, because I've always wanted to play a tournament. It's just the more of the fear of like being, you know, shot off the table turn one and going, oh, good game, thank you. But you know, I mean, you know,
Like
as long as
jumping into a game of Call of Duty.
but you know, I mean, you know, I would turn around first person, go first tournament, man. I've played many games, but first tournament, you know, and then
that's the thing is,
no,
you
my
should
luck, I
know
probably
at
win.
least your army, right? And
Yes.
You should know at least how your army plays and not be going checking all the rules for your own army. There's times that you go, oh, I can't remember what that hat does, but
Yeah.
So that would be one bit of advice I assume. Know your army, don't learn on the job.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, on the plus side, a lot of tournaments tend to pair people so that if you get wrecked in the first round, you won't be facing the people who wrecked their opponent in the first round.
Yep.
So you'll kind of get paired with the people with a similar win rate.
Yes.
So you will get more appropriate challenge opponents as the tourney goes on.
Yeah.
So I may get one win.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Mike is bang on there. So first round will always be random. Then it's generally will be sorted by what we call win-loss draw. So if people have won their game for that round, they will play people who have won for round two. If people have lost in round one, they'll play people who have lost in round two. And it'll keep on going like that. Say you're playing a 6-round event, you could end up with round 6. You might have only 2 players undefeated out that are playing at the top table.
Yeah.
Everybody else below that has taken at least 1 loss. So you could end up, you know, playing in the middle of the pack. You've got 2 wins, 3 losses. You might end up playing a really nice guy for round 6 and end up getting the win, and you've gone 3-3 and you break even for the weekend.
Mediocre man.
Yep. Yeah.
So is it costly to run a tournament? And if so, why?
Yes. But it depends on the context. So if you were running an event at a store, it would depend on a few things. If you need terrain and if you need gaming mats, those are going to be your primary expenses outside of then the store taking the cut, obviously, and prizes. If you're running it at an external venue, the costs do increase significantly because you not only then have to source, you have to pay for the venue, first of all. You then have to consider insurance, public liability insurance, because you're having a number of people playing at that venue. Then you have to go on top of, okay, how many tables do you need? Does the venue actually provide tables for you to actually use? Or do you need to go out and purchase all your own trestles? Do you need the MDF toppers to be able to put on top of those trestles, to be able to put your gaming mats on? Do you have enough gaming mats? How are you actually going to create the battlefields? Do you have enough terrain? Are you able to ask people who are attending to maybe bring a table terrain if they've got one? Sourcing that from the local community. And generally in New South Wales, they're pretty good about that. One of the groups are the Down Under 40K guys. They actually will sometimes facilitate having their terrain and mats being hired out for an event. So you can just pay them per table to get a table's worth of terrain with a mat to be able to be used. So that is another thing you could have. And then you've got prizes on top of that. You know, if you're in my line of work where you're doing tournament coverage and you want someone there streaming the tournament, that is another cost because we do charge at the ATWN to do the tournament coverage. And it mainly goes towards covering our costs. And then you know, if you've gone and spent money to purchase new terrain, you then have to either recoup that yourself, or if you're doing it over a large series of events, you may choose to take a personal loss on it and recoup it over time, but that's generally not recommended as a TO. I've done that myself. I've done the math on it myself when we were looking to move the South Pacific Champs out of CanCon. After I was running it, I did an extensive business plan as to what would the entry fees go to, what would the venue cost, what would go towards terrain, etc., etc. And for the 100+ players that I was looking at getting, it was going to end up being over 10 grand. And that's not even including, you know, potentially organizing terrain to come in and assist. So it does add up. But if you're doing it with a local group or a local club that have already got terrain, they can definitely help you out there. And, you know, I'm sure other organizers are more than willing to help as well. But yeah, to answer the question, it just costs varying amounts depending on where you're at.
Yeah, because I mean, as a player, you look at a tournament entry fee and you're like, why is this costing so much?
Yep. Generally, it hasn't been a transparent thing in terms of, you know, where all the money does go to in terms of events. You know, some events like, say, Battle in the Bush out in Orange that's happening in September, they've got $100 per ticket. Adelaide Uprising just announced for their 3-day tournament on the Australia Day long weekend over in Adelaide that their entry fee is $150. So depending on the number of days you run will determine how much your entry fee costs. It's also your background costs as well. And it could also be, you know, if you're running in a store, for example, tournaments we run at Jolt cost $30 to enter. You compare that to, you know, Battle in the Bush, which is 2 days at, I think it's an RSL or another venue, where they have bar service and, you know, air conditioning and all that fun stuff.
Sorry, you got my attention.
Yeah. There's the 2.5 hours gone.
There's $100 to enter, and then as a player, it does cost you as well, because if you're traveling interstate, you have to pay for fuel, accommodation, food, your army, not just your entry fee. So there are other costs involved on the player side as well.
Yeah. So just sorry, just a few people chiming in. Welcome, first time chat, Mattis Ironheart. It's just saying costs do add up for events, but a bit of prior planning, talking experience event organisers does help out.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah, and it's backing you up with adding your own terrain, match, board, stockpiles, making things easier each time, so you start stockpiling. But then you've got where do you store it all? And
yes,
and there's the cost associated with that.
It's still newlyweds, so they should still be talking to you.
Right up until you stack a bedroom to the ceiling with terrain.
It's when the child is actually sleeping on plastic sprues and
yeah,
there's the line. Yeah,
yeah. So you know, you got to make sure you have that space to store it, or you have people that you have got working together in your team that you could potentially go, hey, do you mind storing X amount of tables and mats? And you just kind of share the load between people at that point as well.
Yeah. Sorry, talk amongst yourself. I just noticed something wasn't working, so that's why my head's facing down here.
Yeah, right.
I did. There was a question that was following about the.
So here's another one. How big is the competitive scene locally?
Thank you. That's what I was
in
trying to get
Australia.
All right. So locally here in Canberra, it's actually growing at a decent rate. I would say we've got anywhere between 20 to 40 competitive players that will play. That would also extend out to like Queanbeyan and such as well. Within the local scene, generally at Jolt tournaments, we will get for the Grim series anywhere between kind of 12 to 24 players, even though we do have a cap of 32. It's just, you know, some people just can't make those weekends and the months, and that happens as well. But in terms of Australia, it is huge. You're looking at least on the southeastern seaboard, anywhere between 500 to 1,000 players minimum, is what I would say. Though, and that's more if you play. So to put in perspective, if you play in one ITC event, you get one score entered as a ranking. Now, some players will just play at one event because they enjoy that event. Some players will travel and try and get as many points as they can for the season and actually fully compete for the top rankings. And they will play at as many events as possible, and then generally be larger events. So, for example, we've got on the network, we're looking at the TNA Open, so the Northside Alliance Open, which is happening first weekend of September. It's a 3-day event. They've got about 140 players in attendance. That's including Queenslanders, New South Wales players, I believe some Victorians are heading up, and some South Australians. And then Adelaide Uprising is aiming for between, I think they're trying to achieve 250 to 300 players this year at their new venue, which is a lot. But you also might not get players who are willing to travel that far for an event, for example. So you might get people who just want to play in their local scene, and that's where they will play. They won't travel to events. They mightn't be able to afford to travel, and they would just want to play locally. And they'll get their points for being in the local scene, and that's fine for them. But there will be others who will travel here, there, and everywhere. You know, you look at all the guys over the WTC at the moment. They've paid thousands and thousands of dollars to travel over to participate in 2 tournaments back to back and then fly home to Australia. So
I guess, yeah, it's commitment.
yes, very much so.
Blacksword's in the chat just say having additional side events like painting comps, does it add up to the number of entrants to the tournament as well, generally?
So it depends on the event. Generally, in terms of doing painting comps, it's more in conventions. If you're running a larger 40k event, whilst yes, there is hobby prizes for painting, players' choice is also a common one where players will go around and pick their favorite looking army. Generally, there's not too much on the hobby side within Australia outside of, say, I believe it's the Crystal Brush out at CanCon that runs every year, and a few other painting comps here and there. I think Moab might have some as well, but I'm not too clued into the competition painting scene within Australia. I'm more hooked into the gaming side of things. So yeah, that it's not necessarily that they're not mutually exclusive. It's just it's very rare to see them together in the same event.
So going with the painting, there's a standard that has to be for the models on the table.
Most of the time there is, particularly if it's a 2-day tournament. If you've played 9th edition and it's same in 10th, you get an additional 10 victory points per game for having a fully painted and based army. Now, previously in editions before 9th, the fully painted and base standard was set by the community, and it was actually set as a 3 colors minimum. And there's a lot of stories in old years, I think Mike might know what I'm on about, where someone will spray paint a marine black and do 3 dots on the shoulder pad, and that's fully painted. Technically. But it's actually
I can't do that.
Shit. No.
I saw that at CanCon one year.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen some dodgy at CanCon. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas now it's like you've got to have at minimum all your base coats done and your basing done. That's kind of the minimum standard. Anything above that, great. But your minimum is having all your base coats and basing.
Very cool. Yeah, I think I like that aspect of the game. I think it's part of the hobby as well. You don't have to be a golden demon painter to put an army on there, but show some love towards that army.
And it's also
and it looks good on the table.
Yes. Yeah, I think games are a lot more enjoyable when you're facing a fully painted army as well.
Yeah.
But also it does vary from event to event. So for example, for the Grim series, we don't necessarily say, oh, your stuff has to be fully painted. We ask players to actually not include the battle ready score. And we actually do a player's choice for best painted instead. Because we'd rather leave it in the player's hands for who they like the look of their army and make sure, okay, which armies are fully painted, the guys are going to know. Because it is more casual, we want players to not have to be like, oh, I've got to paint. If they're playing Gene Steel Pods for the first time, got to paint 120 plus models for this one tournament in a week. It's like, let's not give them that barrier. Let's ease them into it, and then other events will have that standard stapled in, and generally it's at minimum the 2-day events.
Yeah, when I picked Gene Stealer Occult for the slow grow, I was like, ooh, this is a lot of dudes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Orcs. Yeah, what were you thinking?
Yeah.
Then they were
Tyranids
my
wasn't
first.
great for slow grow, actually, now that I think about it.
I did the
orcs
witch
and
cult.
slow
I went,
grow.
oh, that didn't help either. Yeah.
Then my Gene Stealers were my first fully painted army, though.
All right, so I think we've had a look at how you got started, what's involved in running it, and you're thoroughly enjoying it. I'm assuming because you're still doing it. He's too young to have any angst. Damn it.
Oh, I've got angst. Don't you worry.
So I guess the big question now is 10th edition's been out for a while now. Where and how has that affected the tournament scene?
So there's a couple of different facets. We've already talked about Titanic being a problem, not Titanic towering being a potential problem, and terrain. So, you know, I know you guys mightn't be the biggest fans of the way 9th edition terrain was, but the competitive scene actually really enjoyed the way that 9th edition terrain was compared to 10th, because it was actually that descriptive and it was specific. And so
it was fine if you had like pre-agreed.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
these count as this.
Actually, I never had a problem with terrain in 9th.
No, because we kept it as simple as we could. We knew,
Yeah.
that's a building, that's a tree. Move
Yeah.
on.
And so coming into 10th, it's now, okay, we've got to add the footprints, and that's another cost onto your terrain if you're running events, so that people do get cover. They know the bounding box rather than having, as I was saying, those little slips on the terrain, so then you could use obscuring and not actually sit on the terrain, things like that. That's one side of it. The other major side of it, and I'm hearing a lot of grumblings on both sides in terms of people who love the new missions and people who don't like the new missions and people in the middle. So the main grumblings against the missions, and I'll start there, is primarily two of the primary missions, which is deploy servo skulls and also the ritual. Those two are probably the least favorite out of the 9 primary missions that are available.
So just with people listening, the deploy servo skulls, we've played that once, and we thought it's basically you're playing soccer in 40k.
Yes.
And it was, and I did not like that at all.
Oh, is that the moving objectives one?
Yes.
Towards your enemy's deployment zone. Yeah. It was ridiculous.
Yes.
I can understand why people say, no, not a tournament one. And the ritual one is you have to bring out, you do an action to bring a new objective marker onto the table.
So you
Isn't that the one we played?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. So most commonplace in terms of tournaments, people actually use 7.5-inch neoprene objective markers. And I know you guys have used them on Red Belly's stream as well. He's about to grab some, I'm sure.
Yes, he is.
I don't know what you're talking about. We go the right way up? Here, listeners.
Those are actually the most commonplace objective markers used because they actually help with making sure that models are on objective. So if you actually are touching that neoprene marker, you're on that objective. It's just easier. Yeah. And so if you're having to move those, the deploy servo skulls, it's a nightmare once all terrain's everywhere. If you're having to deploy them for the ritual after the fact, it's a nightmare. So those two missions are kind of the two primaries that a lot of TOs are avoiding. The GT pack for Leviathan does simplify the mission rules. So generally you're not going to see stuff like minefields. You're not going to see the Maelstrom and Battle 1 to get 2 different effects. Like, it's really keeping it to chilling rain, hidden supplies for the objective, extra objective marker, player-placed objective markers, or scrambler fields, where you can't infiltrate, scout, redeploy, or I think it's respawn a unit onto any objective markers in No Man's Land or your opponent's one. The only one that you can actually put something onto your opponent's one is by redeploying. We found this out over the weekend at Capital Clash. Satan can actually advance and they get redeployed, a Transcendent Satan, and they can actually be placed on your opponent's objective marker with scrambler fields, but they cannot be placed on No Man's Land.
Wow. Interesting.
Yes.
That one, though, removing that scout and stuff, that could really hamper certain armies who sort of rely on the infiltrators, scout moves.
Yes and no, because it's only limiting you to placing it onto objectives, whereas previously
Okay.
you couldn't do it at all in some of the 9th edition mission
Yeah.
packs.
Yep.
So that's kind of the other mission rules a lot of people aren't using. You'll see maybe sometimes people just do chilling rain and hidden supplies. So you just do the extra objective marker. And that was
Yep.
what Steel City did. They didn't actually touch any of the other mission rules. Then
So,
the
yep.
cards, the actual
so about to
scoring
ask,
cards, secondaries.
where's the mission secondaries coming to? Is it fixed, or do you allow the mouse from a war style?
It is player's choice. And that is by the GT pack itself. Now, I have my personal opinions that do ally with the negative side of things. I think it's incredibly swingy, and I've seen it multiple times now where you can have a really close game on the table with next to nothing left for either side, or each side has got a decent amount of models left.
Yeah.
But one side has just scored dramatically one way and gotten all the cards that have gone their way on tactical, and the other side just hasn't. And
Yeah, we've had those games.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Yeah.
I think I've had a game like that with you, Greg, where it was really tight, but you had 1 billion points and I had none because I just kept drawing cards I couldn't do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you kept drawing the objective you were on.
Yeah. And then you get certain armies that just do not do well with, I need to move. I don't know how. Yeah.
Yeah, and so if you're not playing a list, and this is where the 4 side does come into it, you can actually build lists into playing the tactical objectives. And you can build in such a way that you take units that you can go, okay, cool, if I've got to do extend battle lines turn 2, and there's an objective marker in the top left-hand side of the field on, say, you're playing table quarters, and you're not able to get any of your other units there, and you've got something in deep strike reserves, cool, that's going to go into that objective to score me that secondary. It's playing fast mobile units, and sure, you might have all these super killer units in your list to just annihilate your opponent. You might have a lot of small units that are designed to go around and get those secondaries. But also at the same time, if you go with the secondaries and you go fixed, they are really limited. There's only 7 out of the 16 that you can choose from fixed, and they are not great. Some of them, Storm Hostile Objective, for example, is probably one of the more reliable ones because you can go on and it forces a game. And if your opponent is probably going to come onto that primary and take it from you, you can then take it back and score points on secondaries. But there's really no real good second choice. The way that they've handled actions now is just if you're eligible to shoot, you just don't shoot or charge, and you're able to then do that secondary. So when you compare it to the way that 9th edition was, where you picked your secondaries and it was just the primary that changed, the competitive scene actually really enjoyed that. And sure, objectives, secondaries did get updated kind of every 6 months, and we're expecting that to happen every 6 months. I think there's been a little bit of influence, and I don't see behind the curtain here. This is just from my personal opinion. I think Mike Brandt's had a significant influence in this because he runs Nova Open, and Nova Open previously have run either you go with a fixed endgame objective in editions gone by, or you have progressive scoring over the course of a game. And so I think there's been a bit of influence there. And he has said that, and Stu Black's also mentioned this, that they've wanted to take the Tempest of War style and bring that into the competitive play. There are some vocal people within the competitive community. Brett Perkins, for example, who runs the competitive 40k Facebook group, has been quite vocal on his dislike for the mission. I've seen it on stream going both ways, where it's been really close between players, but it also has been really swingy. Sometimes you just don't get great mission matchups. So yeah, really as TOs, this is a part of the player experience now that we actually need to mitigate. When we create an event, we need to make sure that when we're picking missions, because as a TO, you can specify, okay, you're not going to just draw a deployment, a mission rule, and a primary. No, we're going to set that for you. So then everyone's playing the same mission, everyone's playing the same deployment, everyone's playing the same mission.
Yeah, and you can go at this tournament, don't put these secondaries in the random draw. We think these are not good, or you could specify which ones are available.
Not necessarily, because you don't want to, with so much data coming out of competitive events now, with people like StatCheck There's also the Meta Monday guy on Reddit looking at events right from 2-day events, 3-day events, right down to RTTs, which are your 1-day events. With so much data, you don't want to put something in the pack that is going to massively skew it, because Games Workshop does also look at this data and they do make informed decisions based off it. That is where we've seen the Eldari nerf just come in for Fate Dice a couple of weeks ago, was because Eldari was sitting at a 75% win rate. And so...
Is that all?
Yeah.
There must be some bad Eldari players out there that get down to 75.
But by the same token, tournaments deciding not to run specific secondaries also sends a message through the data.
Yes.
Yeah, it would.
Yeah.
If they go that drill down
Cough,
that
cough,
deep.
Leagues of Votan, cough, cough.
Yep. So, and then you come to the factions. Obviously, there are some factions, Leagues of Votan, Adeptus Mechanicus, Death Guard are not really in the greatest of spots at the moment. Melee armies in general, with the way the terrain is, aren't actually doing that well with the overall damage reduction. There is very rare instances where melee weapons are over 2 damage. So that's a bit of a problem, hindering melee armies once again in the game. I think 9th edition, towards the back end, you could actually play a melee army, and you did see World Eaters for a decent while there, at least here in Canberra. There's a couple of players playing World Eaters, and they were terrifying. If you could not deal enough damage to them and kill a unit outright before they get to do their additional move towards you and potentially get into combat, yeah, that's a bad time.
Game over. Yeah.
So there's such a disparity between the factions that are up the top and the factions that are down the bottom. Like, you're looking at some factions having like a 25% win rate in Death Guard and Votan, and then you're looking at 65, 70s for Eldari, for Genestealer Cults. I know Adeptus Custodes are up there because they are toughness 6 and 7 now. They're really hard to deal with. You've got some armies like Thousand Suns that are up there. They're able to do the double Doom Bolt is quite prevalent, as well as Magnus doing his thing.
So let me just write that down. Double Doom Bolt.
As well as Necrons are actually a bit of a sleeper. They are I've seen some very interesting builds over the past couple of weeks. Some Necron armies do quite well. Some, into the wrong matchups, can suffer. So it depends on the player skill on that part. Genestealer Cults are actually really good because they just bring everything back. It doesn't matter. On a 4-up, if it's non-battle line, they can bring it back. If it's battle line, it comes back. So you're seeing players literally run 120 plus models in their battle line, 6 neophytes of 20 with demo charges, mining lasers, and they'll come in, they'll do the demo charges. The demo charges have been ruled by WTC and Games Workshop to not come back. And then they will, come back on and still sit on an objective, or they'll come back on in safety because you can't get an enemy unit within 9 inches to remove that blip. So there are a lot of faction and meta disparities at the moment. It's actually quite a problem.
We'll kind of expect that with an index, though, because it's not full-blown rules, but we did expect a bit more balance at the same time. So
yes, and the thing that we're waiting on is they've said the next balanced data slate is going to be September, and the first codexes, which is Tyranids and Marines, are meant to be dropping in September. So we're actually going to get the balanced, I dare say we're going to get the balanced data slate either just before the codexes or just after, and there's not going to be enough data out there on the actual codexes themselves. And then we're going to be back to the way 8th edition was, where every codex that came out, if you haven't got a codex by like 6 months after all the codexes have started to drop, you're struggling. And that's what I'm worried about happening. Factions like Genestealer Cults and Eldari are not in the first 10 codexes. I'm not worried about them. It's the factions.
Death Guard weren't even listed on that data slate.
Yeah, some of the really bad ones aren't even on the roadmap.
Yes. And those are the ones that, as a pundit commentator, I am most worried about, because they are going to continue to struggle, and they may even drop off the map completely because players will just stop playing them. They will abandon those factions.
Just want to point out, I played 2 games with my Death Guard and won both, but one of them was definitely against Admech. So, yeah.
And I will point out that there has been a player that has played Death Guard at a tournament and come second place. So if you are a good player, if you are a faction specialist and you know what you're doing and you can build something into the current meta and beat the current meta, go for it.
That was the one who was undefeated. They were the only undefeated player at the tourney, weren't they?
I think so, because the first place guy had some issues with dice as well at that event.
He got a free win that he lost because his opponent was found to have cheated. Yeah,
yes.
That one.
I think it was.
And
yeah.
I think that person, that Death Guard player, even they were like, "Yeah, no, there is one specific build that works, and if you don't do it, you suck."
Harsh.
Yes. So
did he put that list somewhere?
But yeah, 40k is definitely in the Wild West at the moment, and it will be the Wild West for at least the next 6 to 9 months until we have 2/3 of the codexes.
Yeah, which is a bummer. This year was supposed to be my year of Votan, but it's kind of eased off a bit.
Yeah.
Come play me. I've got Death Guard. We'll be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've got Rob with his AdMech, so yeah, we're all top tier players.
Yeah. So yeah, so the general consensus is we're using the missions that we've got at the moment. We're trying to make them, the primary mission and the deployments and the mission rules as balanced as possible for players, and then leaving the secondaries up in the players' hands. And even Games Workshop's Leviathan GT pack has said, don't use battle points, which is a common pairing metric, because you'll have your win-loss draws. Then what was commonplace in ninth is you do battle points directly after it, and then you do other things like strength of schedule and such, which BCP allows for. Their recommendation is doing what is called, you do win-loss first, and then you do opponent win percentage, and that is the amount of games that your opponents you have played have won their games. So in a 3-round tournament, for example, every player's game win percentage will be at minimum 33%. So even if you lose all your games, because you've played against one player who is, say you play against say you're last place and you play against the guy that comes second last, because he won against you, his win percentage is 33%.
Yeah.
And so that's how that kind of works. And then I actually tested this at Jolt the other week with the Grim series. We actually did that. And then opponent game win percentage. So how many times their opponents won against them, as well as another metric. So there's a lot of different metrics that go through, and then they do battle points after that. And then you do strength of schedule, extended strength of schedule. Like it's a full list of things that you can do in BCP, and everyone's still trying to figure out how to best do it. The one other way that you can mitigate the swinginess of the cards and how scoring works is using what we call the WTC scoring format, which is you actually, instead of doing the raw battle points from the actual scores, you do it on a 0 to 20 differential, where a 10-10 draw is when you're within 0 to 5 battle points of each other. And then for every 5 points either way, the winner gets an additional point, the loser gets 1 point
Loses
difference.
a point. Yep.
So say there's a 20-point difference, it ends up being a 14-6, for example. Or actually, no, it's a 13-7. So you could do it that way as well, and that would mean it's not as swingy in terms of the battle points, but then you're putting another metric in over the top of that to help try and alleviate the swinginess of the cards.
Yeah, okay. I think that's what CanCon used to do back when I did it.
Yes.
They had, you draw, minor victory, major victory, slaughter or something, or massacre, I think the top one was.
Yeah.
So have we? Are we using like the battle, the power level type stuff for the list building in tournaments with 10th, or have we devised a better mechanism? How are we dealing with the swinginess that can bring?
So currently we just use points as is. So if you've been paying attention, 10th edition power level no longer exists. Welcome back points to power level, because the way that they've changed points is effectively what
They've
power level
made it
was.
Power level, larger power level number. Yeah.
Yes. And so really it's just everyone plays the most common tournament points level is 2,000 points. That is what is considered to be balanced in all intensive purposes, in quotation marks there. And so everyone's playing at that level, and you do the best you can. Unfortunately, we've never in 40k outside of community comp that I was involved with back in 7th edition, have not had a comp system like what the European Team Championships did for old Warhammer Fantasy, where certain armies would get more points based on their strength in the edition, or less points if they were overpowered.
That was a question I was going to ask. Like, do you do like a comp system? Because I remember, you know, in my several years of playing CanCon, there was several different comp systems.
Generally, not so much nowadays. We are trusting in Games Workshop to actually keep the game balanced. I mean, they've showed that intent majority of 9th edition, particularly the back end, with the updates for Nephilim and Arcs of Omen GT packs, the balanced data slates for 18 months, every 3 months, keeping up to date with FAQs. So really, it's been a lot more on the Games Workshop being more interactive in the competitive scene. However, there is starting to become more of a wider concern for the wider community that Games Workshop is actually focusing too much on making the game a competitive format.
Yeah, I think we've talked about that over the years as well.
Well, yeah,
how much the competitive tournament has driven the actual game itself.
Yeah.
Like, you know, but with comp, like things like I've seen people talking about the battle line problem, where GW clearly wants people to take battle line, but I've read that people aren't.
Yes, and it's also something else I'm seeing in the trend in army lists is people are either taking a lot of characters or they're taking 1 to 2 characters. It's there's no in between. It's either one or the other. And so that's massively impacting list builds. And sure, we did start to see this towards the end of 9th edition with the Arcs of Omen changes where it freed up your slots massively. You got to pick what your compulsory was, and that's fine. I don't necessarily see that as much of a problem. However, I do agree that we could have done something a bit different rather than opening the floodgates. I think the 3 was fine when you could only take it in a set force org, and you had to take X number of minimum units for certain builds. Like, sure, taking 3 elites, no dramas. Like, you're taking still 3 compulsory of a particular style, but you're missing out in troops being objective secured. Now, most battle line units that you will see on the tables are going to be objective control 2, so there is that benefit towards taking them, but some armies, like Eldari, for example, might take 1 unit of Rangers with Illic Night Spear because that is a powerful combination for 115 points, and it will just do mortal wounds because of Illic, and they will spend points in D Cannons, Wraith Knight, the Incarn, Fire Prisms. Yeah, they'll spend it in all the other stuff that they want to actually take. Or you can run into some lists where, you know, say, for example, you're playing Marines, you might take 2 units of 5 Tactical Marines. Not Tactical Marines, sorry, Intercessors.
Firstborn.
No, Tactical Marines are a full unit of 10 for 175 points. Whereas Intercessors are 90 points for a unit of 5, and they have the sticky objectives rule built into them. And so, yes, you might take them in just 2 units of 5. You might just take the 2 units, because then you sit 1 on your home objective. You can send 1 out into no man's land pretty early on. You secure your home backfield objective. You make sure that's safe for a couple of turns, and then you can send that other unit out to go sticky another one late game. But
everybody writing that down?
But it really depends on what abilities each unit does have. Now that each unit has their own specific abilities as well, that's going to impact on whether they do get taken or not. As I was saying with Gene Stealer Cult, it is quite common to see a lot of battle line units because they are guaranteed to come back. So yeah, it's different for different armies.
Yeah, I just remember 1 year I got the worst comp score in the entire tournament because my army was almost entirely troops.
I like running mostly troops. Yeah.
I was running a giant pile of Grey Hunters.
I thought you were going
and the TOs didn't like it.
Full squad of grots. That's it.
Yeah, so I can see the desire not to wade into judging what's an appropriate army because it's so vague.
Yeah.
With the point system as it is, sorry, the power levels, point system, whatever. Do you enforce a WYSIWYG component to the miniatures because everything's so free to upgrade, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Is it enforced that WYSIWYG side of things?
It's commonplace to enforce it. So it's going back to that whole thing around 3D printed models counts as proxies. If you're wanting to run something and you don't necessarily have the model for it, you have to get permission to do so beforehand. So it is commonplace that, yes, in a unit of 20 neophytes, I have those four mining lasers there actually modeled.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah,
I've got everything.
I ran into the opposite problem with the Crimson Fists that I built forever ago. Some of those Stern Guard squads have illegal loadouts now. Like I can't have the heavy flamers.
Yes.
I've got a Land Speeder Storm where I converted the Scout leaning out the side with a heavy flamer, and they can't even take heavy flamers at all. So I was, those are heavy bolters because they can't be flamers.
Death Guard champions, they don't have power fists. It's called a heavy plague weapon.
Quad Devourer Flyrant doesn't exist anymore. And I bought those Forge World arms, god damn it.
Yep. So in those instances where the model can't actually take that piece of war gear, generally if you run it by the TO and go, hey, I'm wanting to run this Stern Guard with a heavy flamer to count as the heavy bolter, because the heavy flamer is no longer a legal option, in my personal opinion as a TO, to me that's fine. You're still using the legitimate model. It's still a heavy weapon. It's still distinct enough in the unit. It is not a legal option for them, and you're just counting it as something else. That is a really easy one to run. It's when you're wanting to run multiple different units that are the same models as multiple different units for another army, or as something in your army, and it's like, if there's no discernible way to tell them apart, it's going to be a hard no. Because it's just going to confuse the heck out of your opponent.
This unit of 5 guys with no arms, that's the one with a heavy weapon.
Yeah, we did have someone within our group who ran that way. They didn't last very long in our group. Yeah. All right, so you do Twitch, you do broadcasting tournaments, you run your own tournaments. Is this it? Is this your life now? Is this what you do as full time? Is this your business?
It is the business officially now, the Australis Tabletop Wargaming Network. It is we've got an ABN, we've got business account, all that fun stuff. It is a legitimate business entity under the ownership of myself. It is not full time for me though. It is very much still part time. In addition, I do also have a team that help me with tournament coverage because I cannot get to every tournament that wants us there. I simply cannot afford it. To travel to multiple interstate events every second month or every month. So having teams to be able to assist with, traveling to various events, doing the tournament coverage, also having events pay us for our services now as well does assist in that matter, in terms of covering our costs. So yeah, just, it is full time. I have a pipe dream. If this ever takes off and becomes full-time, that would be great. I think it'd be good to just be at home creating content, painting models, doing games, doing battle reports, coaching people, doing commissions and all that fun stuff. Live it, breathe it, be 24/7 immersed in 40K. Do I think that's realistic? Not at this time. I think if it ever gets to a point where I'm able to take one day off a week to do this kind of stuff and work part-time and be able to be paid by the business. If it ever gets to that point, I don't foresee it at the moment, but that would be the more realistic expectation for me.
Living the dream. Look at us all jealous. This is my retirement plan. I'm following your model. Come on.
But I will say it is exhausting to keep up with everything that's going on in the scene, particularly when new releases drop and you're getting multiple codexes in a month, having to create content around that and keeping up with what's happening in the competitive scene. Okay, what are the popular builds? What's the top factions? There's a lot to keep up to date with, particularly, and a lot of the top players are also content creators. Like you look at Art of War, for example, you look at Vanguard Tactics. A lot of those guys are content creators as well as being top players because they live and breathe it and it's their day job. And that's why they're the top players, because they have nothing else.
I don't say it so sad like that. They've got nothing else.
Well, in the sense of a full-time job like the rest of us, right?
Yeah.
Like they're not...
They can dedicate the time,
Yeah, that's the way that I mean it. Not necessarily like, oh, they don't have anything else
They
in their
got nothing
lives.
else. If they lose the next tournament, they're bankrupt, homeless. No.
I mean, that would be a massive disservice to the Art of War guys, particularly Richard Sealer, who does have his doctorate. So yeah, no, I definitely didn't mean in that capacity. I more
No,
meant it in
that's
that,
just me
in the
being a
way
smart
of-
ass. I'm impressed you can get a doctorate in 40k though. That's impressive.
I don't think it's in 40k. It's in something else. But yeah.
As long as it's not AOS, it's fine.
Yeah. Just calling out Black Sword in chat as well. I'm just seeing that. Where's the line drawn for 3D printed miniatures and proxy models during a tournament? And Xavier also did cover it. 25% is kind of the line that I personally draw. Some events will be no holds barred as long as you run it past the TO and it's all good. Then you're fine. If they say no, it's a no. It will vary depending on event to event and tournament to tournament and TO to TO.
But GW's got a hard no if they're involved in the tournament.
GW do have a hard no, particularly with their Warhammer Worlds that they're running in the back end of September, early November. I forget the dates for that. We do have a circuit called the Oceanic Competitive or Championship Circuit. I forget the exact naming of that second C in there, the OCC. Their event is pretty much paying for one Australian player to go over and play at that event, which is, and I'll say, the personal thing is a little frustrating to only get one player over there when there is actually, or 1 to 2 players. I think there might be a second ticket there as well that's not paid flights and accommodation. But it's a little frustrating when you look at America getting so many tickets. You look at other parts of the world, and yet we only get the one.
Is that a reflection of the maturity of Australia's competitive scene, or is it just because we're a small population, we're so far away from everyone?
I think it's a combination of the second. I think it's because we're so far away. I think it's also because in comparison to Europe, to the UK, to America, it's a lot easier to travel to bigger events, and everyone's a lot more densely packed, and it's a lot easier to fly from Europe or England over to the States than it is from Australia because it's a 16-hour flight.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just a 40k thing either. Like, look at the World Cup.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
I don't, because I don't know the result and I don't want to know yet. Right?
So yeah, but don't get me wrong. I love the fact that we are still involved. It's just I would love to see a greater representation being afforded to Australia, and I will also call out our Kiwi brethren who have to actually come across to us to play with
Come on,
that
it's
chance
2 hours.
as well.
Get over it. It's not that far. It's not that hard.
But they don't have the opportunity, as far as I'm aware, to actually get a ticket across at this point. Might be
to the
different
US.
next
I
year.
said we
Yeah.
let them in. Yeah.
Oh, to the US Warhammer Worlds. I'm not certain if they've got an event or not that they're able to play at for that opportunity.
Yeah. I was interested in that because I found in other competitive side of things, it's generally because we're such a small percentage of global competition. That's generally why we get overlooked in a few things. So.
I mean, comparatively to how many players we have competitively, as I said, we've got about 500 to 1,000. When you look at the US, you're looking at about 10,000 plus.
Yeah, and that's where I was going.
Yeah.
Necromorris just asked a question. He's got a Forge Well Thousand Suns Dread. Can it still be used as a Hellbrute?
If it is a traditional dreadnought, in terms of it's not a contemptor, even if it was a contemptor, the best thing to do is always ask your TO. If you're attending an event, always ask. The worst thing that they can say is no. And if you don't ask the question, you rock up on the day, you could get a yellow card for it, right? So as the player, always ask. If it's the same base size and it's roughly the same dimensions, if it is a little bigger than what the current Hellbrute model is, there should be no problem with that.
yeah, I think the old box naught's about the same dimensions as the Hellbrutes anyway. So.
Yes. Yeah.
And if you are going to make like 100% proxy army, make it cool. Because then you might at least get, some lols.
Yeah.
Before you get knocked back.
Yeah. So I generally try to not call out names, but there is a gentleman in New South Wales, Heath Burkill, who does convert up a lot of armies as orc armies. And Like he's done Orc Knights, for example. He's done Orc versions of Necrons. Like he's done a lot of like custom conversions to run various armies with an orcified theme.
Did he run like, was it the Orc Imperial Guard? Where it was, I remember seeing an army that was entirely Imperial Guard, but it was all orcified.
Orcs. Yeah.
And they ran as Imperial Guard.
I'm
They
not
were Orc models.
sure.
I think that's an overseas one because I've seen it on it. Someone brought it to a YouTube. It was competitive.
So
there
is a gentleman by the name of Matt Root, I believe, is the right player who did play an orcified AdMech army. And he did win the ITC a couple of years ago, but I have not heard of someone running a orcified army of Imperial Guard.
I know it was probably a while ago. I remember seeing it at one point.
Sure, there's more than one out there.
Mm.
There's some mad people who just love green.
Yeah.
There's a guy doing custom models of an army of xenomorphs which act as NIDs.
Yeah.
So it's from Sakawaka.
Yep, as long as it's, if it's not an event that has a limitation on those 3D printed models or counts as, and the TO's fine with it, that'd probably be fine. And then for Necron Warriors, if it's a little bit smaller, but the same base size, I would say if you build up the basing on it a little bit to kind of get that height to being the same profile, then it would be fine.
Yeah, it's being a little bit taller is fine because you're putting yourself at a disadvantage. Than if you're putting yourself smaller and you're hiding a bit easier. Yeah, that makes sense. I had a really good question, but it's gone now. So brilliant. I was just going to say, when you do custom, you have to make sure it's very clear to your opposition what it is, right?
Yes.
You can't just put, here's a box. Yeah, that's a grot. What are you talking about?
You can't just plop a Coke can and say it's your death threat, right? You've actually got to like put hobby
effort. Give it legs first. Yeah.
Yeah. You got to put hobby effort into it. You've got to actually make significant headway in terms of making it customized, putting the effort in painting it well, making sure it's on the right base. If it's not, as we were saying, if it's not the right height, making it relatively the same height as close as possible, if not a little bigger. So, yeah.
Cool. What else, folks? We've taken up a lot of Scotty's time.
I was just going to say, do you normally run like a sportsmanship kind of thing, and if so, how? Like, do you get people to rate their opponents each game? I remember once being given a slip after each game. Did you enjoy this game? How do you rate this opponent?
I think it depends on the event. For tournaments nowadays, good sportsmanship is a minimum expectation. So only when someone behaves badly, that's where the yellow card comes out for player decorum. If it is warranted. Sometimes, you're not going to get along with everybody, and sometimes people just rub you the wrong way, and it's going to be like, okay, you just got to... You've just got to
No, just pointing out, he's won the sportsmanship so many times, it's just not funny. I think we just have to stop that award.
People like
I can't understand why I've never won it.
People enjoy winning against me, I should say.
So it's, if you rub... personality clash, that's not a reason for a yellow card. If someone's hurling abuse at you or constantly arguing over rules, then that's a cardable offense. But in terms of sports, the way that I've done it, I've seen two different ways. You can either do it as a TO's award, where you actually look around and see who's having a good time, who has been like a great sport about it, whether win or lose or things going their way or not. The other way you can do it is you can actually get the players to vote for their favorite opponent out of the 3 games they've played, rather than doing the old player comp, which is what you were referring to, Mike, where you rated your opponent every game. You actually get them, because doing the old player comp, you could actually sports hit someone, and you could talk to your mates, and if they played into them, you can get them to sports hit them as well. Whereas this method, it's like, no, you pick your favorite opponent out of everyone that you play. So it's not going on the negative side. It's going, where was your best experience?
Okay.
And so you want to, in that method, particularly with, same thing with players' choice painting. Sometimes, yes, events will have a painting rubric and they'll do a best painted by that rubric. which is publicly available in Players Pack as it should be by best practices. But if you're doing a player's choice for sports, it's that positive side. If you're doing player's choice for painting, you're getting them to pick what they think the best, rather than going, oh, I don't like how that's painted, and giving them a poor paint score, because you're doing player judged painting and going, this one's going to be 1, my mate's going to be 5, because your mate's them, right? So yeah, it's more commonplace to do it as either a TO's award or a player's choice side of things.
Great question from Black Sword here. If you are new to the tournament scene, especially with the new 10th edition, what would you recommend for a new player? What army would you recommend a new player to try and not be overwhelmed with technical rules, etc.? Like Gene Stillicott's probably not a good army to start with.
So actually, this is a very interesting question, because I actually had someone that I'm good mates with ask me this recently, this exact question. And I kind of take it in a bit of a different way. If you pick up an army because it plays well on the table, but you hate building it, you hate painting it, you are not going to enjoy playing that army. You are not going to have the hobby drive to get it built fully to even be able to field it. You're not going to have the drive to even get it painted. So my recommendation, instead of going and you could chase the meta, and there are players out there that do chase the meta, but the reason why they chase the meta is because they have all the models available to them. If you are in the position where you don't, and you only pick up 1 or a couple of armies, my wholehearted recommendation, I'm sure Greg and Mike and Mark and Adam will back me up on this one, pick the army you like the look of best. Do not go with something that you think will be good on the tabletop. Even if an army...
the rule of cool.
Yes, because if you enjoy the look of the army, if you enjoy how they actually aesthetically look as miniatures when they're fully painted, or from Games Workshop or from other people that you've seen, you can go, I like the look of that. I'm going to enjoy building those models, painting it up, and you're actually going to enjoy the hobby, because the hobby is about enjoyment. You don't want to put yourself through building a 2,000 point Eldari army right now because it is one of the top 5 armies in the game, and you're just doing it because you want to win games. And even at that point, if you are picking up an army entering 10th edition and you haven't played before, and you are wanting to win games, one, you're coming at it with the wrong mentality to start off with, because you're coming in to win and not have fun. Winning is second. Having fun should always be first, no matter what.
Yep.
A great example is Nate. He decided he got sick of losing tournaments, so he built a dog bomb army back in the day, and he took it to CanCon, and he did really well. He nearly won, but he hated it so much he's never entered a tournament since.
Yep.
It turned him off tournament gaming completely because he hated playing it. He won almost all the time, but he hated it.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, even if the army isn't great, you can still have fun playing that faction and play the best builds that you can. Like, for example, there was a period of time there where, and I know, Greg, we played a game with this faction, where Marines weren't doing that great, but John Lennon from Art of War won quite a large tournament with Deathwatch. And it was a triple Redemptor build with 3 kill teams, some incursors, and Tech Marine and stuff. And I built that list because it was good at the time. And I purchased everything I needed for that. And I still haven't fully painted everything for that list. I can humbly say that that is still a work in progress list. But we've gone through 12 months since there's been points changes, there's been an addition change. And so because the game changes so frequently, lists change so frequently, what's at the top of the meta does change frequently, or can change quite quickly. And so if you're going to invest $1,000 here in Australia in an army, you want it to be something you're going to enjoy playing, because you're going to invest...
Or at least something that you want to have in your house. Heaven forbid the tournament scene just evaporates and GW goes into oblivion.
Yes. Yeah. So to get back to your question, Black Sword, yes, pick an army that is, you enjoy the look of and what you want to play and what you want to enjoy playing, but also picking something that's not, overwhelming with technical rules. The brilliant thing at the moment is you can actually see the army rules for every faction available for free. This is the first time that you actually have legal and legitimate, because there are illegitimate means, of being able to get access to the rules and actually read through them. Now is the perfect time to pick that army, because you can read the army rules for the armies that you want to play. Say you get to a short list of 3, for example, and you look, and one's not too complex, one's medium complexity, and a third is really hard to play, i.e. Gene Stealer Cults, for example. And you go, I don't want to learn how to play Gene Stealer Cults because that seems a bit too heavy to learn, but I don't necessarily want something that's just point click, say like Guard, where it's like I move models and I shoot. Cool. I want to go something in the middle where I've got a little bit of everything. Say it's Chaos Space Marines. So that would be one way that you could go with as well. And you have that ability to do so now because the indexes are free. We don't know if they're going to be updating the data cards and everything for free yet when codexes release. I dare say they're going to be releasing different detachments in the codexes, but they're still, I hope, going to keep those index cards available for free for people to still get into the game.
Yeah, it'd be good, wouldn't it? Necromore was just backing it up with the, it's got World Eaters, Thousand Suns, Death Guard, and the army looks like it has to look good before it goes onto the table. Yeah, so it's backing that up is, the rule of cool.
Yeah.
I will avoid putting anything grey on the table to play.
Yeah.
But that's my personal choice. Not playing a tournament.
And they're the first models to leave as stuff gets shot.
Correct. And then if there's someone else or a different squad shot, I will swap them around. Yes.
Yeah. Whereas I've always been a sucker for the but if I build it, I can play with it. So I will often prioritize building more models over painting more models because I always have more things to build. But I do try and paint things.
Yes.
I think that's the key, though. We've talked about this before. Another one is I have no qualms about someone bringing on a grey army as long as they're trying to paint it.
Yeah, like I have one army per year I went in CanCon that is entirely in 3 colors. Not like dots of color, but they've at least got 3 base colors on them.
Yeah.
Well, Black Sword's just asking, is there an army, a faction that stands out more that someone comes over and talks to the TO about? To settle arguments, as he's put in.
Which army is the problem child?
That's the nice way of saying it. Yeah.
It depends on the format of the event. Because, say for example, you're not using the WTC FAQ that actually clarifies a lot, and I mean a legitimate lot of poor interactions or poorly worded rules in the game. You as the TO have the responsibility of being able to clarify those weird and wonderful situations that do occur. And I've had to make a call recently that I've had to swallow a bit of pill on with Grey Knights. So Grey Knight's faction ability is that at the end of your opponent's turn, you get to pick up to a certain number of units. They do not say if they go into reserves or not. They do not say if they count as reserves or if they're strategic reserves. And then they come back onto the table during your reserves. And they have to come back on by the end of the turn. Now, I had a quick look and I didn't fully delve into this. And the question was, can Grey Knights use this faction ability turns 1, 4, and 5? So it's understanding, yes, you can do it turns 2 and 3 because if they count as reserves, it's fine. My initial answer was, no, you can't. They would count as reserves. That way, you can't technically come on turn 1, and you have to be on the battlefield by turn 3. And the player in particular went, that pretty much nukes my army. I'm not going to play something that I believe is unplayable, and that's fine. That's the player choice to do that. He asked the question, I gave the answer. Now, at this point, after discussing with other people and re-looking at things after the fact, I would probably amend my answer because in the wording of the Grey Knights thing, it says they have to be on the battlefield by the end of the game, which means it opens up turns 4 and 5. So I would just say you can't do it turn 1. That would be my personal ruling. Now, the WTC FAQ states you can do it all 5 turns of the game.
Huh.
So that's where it's different, and a lot of players are defaulting to the WTC FAQ because they've had to get everything in place for WTC this week. And, you know, they've had just over a month to do it. So that with some of the top names in the world of competitive 40K in attendance, they've been hammering all of these questions and rulings out for weeks. And they got the FAQ out, I think, a week ago, just before GW. No, they got it out before the GW FAQ, and they delayed list submission so that GW's FAQ could be included to help balance certain factions like Eldari, so that fake dice weren't just ruining people's days.
And I guess it probably helps when you get an argumentative player to be able to go, look, you know, it's in the FAQ. I didn't write it, man.
Yep.
The answer is the answer.
Yes.
Because
And
if you're making a judgment call, they will argue with you.
Yeah. And so that's where, as the TO, you've got to make a decision as to whether or not you're going to follow, say, for example, the WTC FAQ, or if you're going to do it all yourself. I primarily made the call not to follow WTC for the Grim series, purely because it's meant to be a casually competitive event, and I didn't want to have to go, if this is someone's first tournament, getting back to Adam's point earlier, I don't want to have to send them to some obscure website that they've probably never heard of to find out a ruling from a third party that isn't Games Workshop.
Yeah.
I would rather them ask me in person on the day or ask me before the event for a ruling.
Yeah, you don't want to do the metaphorical equivalent of, hi, welcome, FUD, read this.
Yes. Pretty much. Pretty much.
All right. So we have taken up a lot of your time, and I do appreciate it. And I do appreciate you coming on and having a chat.
Yeah, no worries at all.
Quick advice for a new tournament, people.
Quick advice, if you're attending your event, have realistic expectations. Don't expect to win all your games. Go there to have fun. You will meet like-minded people when you get into those last few rounds where you may have gone 0-2 in your first 2 rounds, and you're playing people who are just there to have fun for the rest of the weekend. You know, if you put your opponent's player experience first, you're more than likely going to have that reciprocated. So, you know, if you're being willing and showing your intent about, oh, I'm doing this so I can do this, generally that player may reciprocate. Might not always occur, but it's expected that you know, if you're showing that kind of intent, your opponent should as well. But yeah, biggest one, go in, have fun, enjoy yourself. You know, you've paid money to go and play. You don't want to have a bad experience because of your own player attitude or your own expectations. So yeah, that would probably be my biggest one. And it's a dice game. It's toy soldiers. Like, at the end of the day, you know, we're all playing the game to have fun. The guys at the top, sure, they want to win the tournament and get the prizes and all that. But at the end of the day, we're all playing the same game. So keep that in mind.
And a really big question. You've got 3-card system. Are you going to add an orange one instead of having 2 yellow and a red?
Probably not. I'd probably do the black, though.
The black. There you go. Fair enough. Answer solved. Make sure you ask your TOs these important questions before the event.
Yeah.
When is your next event?
So in terms of streaming or in terms of running?
Running. We'll start with the running.
Running.
I know you're streaming. We'll get to that.
The next event is going to be happening, if I just pull up my calendar, because I need to make sure I get this date right, is going to be the 9th of September. It's the Grim Series Tournament number 5, happening at Jolt Games. It's a 10 o'clock start for a 10:15 round 1 kickoff. $30 entry. Pretty casually competitive affair. So if you haven't played in tournaments before, it's a great way to get started. A lot of the local guys are really good in terms of the community and making sure that everyone has an enjoyable time. And we've got great terrain now as well, with a couple of Adelaide Uprising tables that we've procured recently as well. And as we were saying earlier, Jolt is an absolutely awesome store. So it is.
How do we
great.
find out more details about your tournaments?
So the best way to find out information about the events for tournaments that I am personally running, currently I run the Slow Grow and will be looking to kick off the next round of Escalation Leagues at Jolt. One of my offsiders has taken the 2,000 point match gaming side of things for the competitive side of things, because I'm actually looking to move into state before the end of the year. And so I'm looking to offload it to, not necessarily in a bad way, but make sure it's still carried on and that there's still events being run consistently. So the guys that I've been working with will be continuing to do that. So we've got that coming up. We've got the last round of the Slow Grow next week. We'll have a week for prizes, which is also the week off. And then we'll be kicking off the next Escalation League. And I dare say the 2,000 point match play league will be happening at the same time. And then in terms of the Grim series, we got that on the 8th. And then we'll have in October, we'll have 2 weeks until, when is it? Because I've gotten this all written down since the start of the year for the fun stuff. So from memory, the Grim Series tournament number 6 is on the 14th of October, with then the Grim Masters. So this is where we invite the top 16 ranked players in the ACT to attend. If they aren't able to attend, it goes down the list effectively. And that'll be on the 28th of October, so 2 weeks after. Pretty short turnaround for that one. And then we might have another one in November happening at Jolt. That's to be confirmed, though.
Cool. So where do we find the information? Then?
Oh, sorry. Facebook. Best place is Facebook. I
think
rattled
that was
those
my question.
dates
I'm
off.
sure it was.
Yeah, that was your question. I just rattled off dates. No, Facebook. If you search Jolt Games up, we actually do all the events through there because it is run in the store. So all the events are up on Facebook. So if you just search Jolt Games, and if you have a look through, if you find the 40k Grim series, it should be some form of that name. That will be where you can find the event for the Grim series. We started all the way back in February, and it's running all the way through to the end of October on the Facebook event. So it's got the players pack linked. It's got the rankings for the ACT linked as well. So you can find all the information there. And if you want to get in touch with me, I'm a co-host on there, so you can find my details on Facebook and shoot me a Facebook message. Or you can message me through the ATWN's Facebook page.
Wonderful. So I was about to say, give us your socials. Come on.
All right. So the next tournament that we are looking to cover, unfortunately, my work has kind of messed me around for the next one I was meant to do in a week and a half's time. The next one is going to be the North Alliance Open. That is the first weekend in September. Our team member Jack is going to be heading up there for all 3 days. Depending on my work situation, I might be commentating all 3 of those days as well, remotely from here in Canberra. And that is going to be on the Australis TWN Twitch channel here on Twitch. So if you aren't already following, I know Red Belly's popped it up in chat. The best one to head to is the link tree that he's got linked. That has got all the socials, whether it's going to be the Australis Tabletop Wargaming Network on Facebook and YouTube, or the Australis TWN on Instagram, TikTok, as well as Twitch. We may be changing platforms at some stage as well, so bear that in mind. If you want to keep up to date with all the content we are creating, make sure you're following us everywhere, particularly Facebook and Instagram. We will release our schedules weekly on there on a Sunday afternoon, so you'll be able to see what's coming up on the week for the network as well. So we like to keep you guys up to date of what we're covering. We do weekly YouTube videos, not just of the tournament games that we do stream, but also I do a lot of content based around how to play the new edition is one that I'm massive on at the moment, trying to get through, as well as a new series that I've started called From Sprue to Tabletop to help new hobbyists get their armies from Sprue to being tabletop standard, to getting to that battle ready, or if they want to, what GW have called parade ready. We are going to go through that, and it's going to be a series that we continue to look at different painting styles. Plan is to look at doing metallics and tinting metallics as well, how I do my Necrons, as well as looking at Zenithal and working with contrasts as well. Using the slap chop method is one of the other things I want to cover in this series. So there's going to be a lot of info on the hobbying side as well, because I do want to not just with the network. I don't want to just cover the competitive side. I don't want to just cover the intro side. I want to cover everything. And I don't just want to cover the gaming. I also want to cover the hobbying, because I think you'll see so many content creators out there. They'll do maybe the hobbying side is a massive focus, or they might do hobbying and gaming, but they might focus on competitive gaming and competitive hobbying. or they might just do the intro side of the game. And I think that if you cast a wide net, you're going to appeal to a lot more people in terms of content. So that's kind of the approach I've taken with it, because I think if you're able to have both tournament games and learning how to paint in the one spot, you can build people up from as they get into the hobby right up to when they're wanting to compete at tournaments.
Yeah, it sounds fantastic. Yeah.
And develop them into those nice Renaissance hobbyists.
Yeah.
Follow Scotty's way, or he is the Lord.
But of course, everyone's got their own hobby preferences in the way that they like to hobby, and that is something that is down to my core. Whilst I can suggest tips and tricks and the ways to do things and how to play the game in my interpretation of the rules and how they work, at the end of the day, if it's a rule and you think it plays differently, always talk with your tournament organizer. If it's a hobby technique, take what you want from what I do and apply it to your own hobbying, and leave what you don't want to take. Because I don't want to tell you that this is the way you should be doing it. No, this is a hobby. You can choose to do your hobby how you wish to do so. So
yeah, I often say experiment, go nuts.
Yep.
There's no right or wrong way to do it.
Yeah.
It's what you feel comfortable, what you want it to look like, go for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Getting back to the whole rule of cool, and you're going to enjoy it a lot more if you are doing it the style that you want and you get the look the way that you want it.
So there is a wrong way. If you paint a space marine in ultramarine color, that's the wrong way.
Them fighting words.
I'm glad I used
Fantastic.
Cantor Blue.
Yeah, there you go. So, and of course, we can catch you at Twitch for your regular stuff during the week, of course. What normal days we find you there?
Normal days, funnily enough, Monday nights from 8:30 or 9 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, where we will do tournament previews, or we'll, at the moment, I do what we call Commission Mondays, where I work on the Lionel Johnson commission that I'm working on. And then Friday nights for Friday hobbying, that's where I work on my own personal projects. And then if we're covering a tournament, generally you'll catch us on a Saturday and Sunday. That'll be on the schedule. So that's why it's important to be following us on Facebook and Instagram, so you're able to actually see those posts when they go up.
Make sure you do hit Australis TWN up.
Yep.
Right.
The other spot to keep notified as best as possible is our Discord. So it is the Australis Tabletop Wargaming Network Discord. It is linked in the link tree as well, there at the top. So you can jump in there. It's not a particularly active server. I will say that, and I am upfront about that. I can't be everywhere at once. But at the same time, I do try to engage with people when I can and talk about hobbying. People share the hobby progress. We talk about army lists and stuff in there, as well as it's also where you can find out the tournament lists that are on stream when we do tournaments. We post those up because lists are hidden behind a paywall on BCP, and I'm not the biggest fan of having that on stream. So I do take those, put them up in the Discord. So if you jump in the Discord, you can view those for not having to pay $7 a month.
Yeah, I've looked at the BCP and went, oh, they want money for it. No. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Guys, do you have anything else you wanted to ask while we have him here before we let him loose into the world? No, look at them all.
No, thank you
Again,
very much.
Scott, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We got a better insight into the tournaments. I think at least Adam and I might be signed up. What was the 8th of September was the next one, was it?
Yes. Yes.
I'm interested. I've just built a list of Slaanesh.
Yep.
Ooh. I'll bring Dexter to prove a point.
Now, it'd be great to have you guys if you did choose to rock up.
Yeah, get ready for those 2 red cards straight away.
He said black. We're going to go for the black.
We just turn up to the door and they sing black cards straight away.
Yeah.
Where'd that come from?
But I want to thank you for joining us tonight. I want to thank the chat as well. Some great questions coming through and some feedback. Thank you very much for that. Makes it all worthwhile. We've done all your social stuff. Great. Done. I'm looking at who else is here. Oh, Adam's got an Instagram.
Yes, I do. It's Pronto 40K.
I'll bypass Mark. Mark, do you want to advertise anything? You've got an X account still?
Huh? Me?
Yeah. You're Michael.
No, sorry. I wasn't sure if you said Michael or Mark. I've stopped using it when he bought it.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, it seems right. Okay, well, I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight, and you can follow me with my Instagram, RedBellyBlack. You can find the RLG group on Facebook, RLG40K. You can find this podcast at any great podcast place. That's right, any great podcast place, because we're just that good. Any support for the podcast is always welcome. Hit that subscribe button. It's always very handy for us. We appreciate any support we can get. I don't think I got anything else. There is a 40k game being streamed on this channel here this weekend. So if you listen to us right now, I'm not going to say the date, so that's going to keep you guessing. Is it this weekend? Or is it this weekend?
I'm thinking, is it
Saturday?
you and me?
Yeah, Saturday. If that works. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yep.
Cool. Yeah, you bring that Salvation, I'll bring the Death Gun. We'll prove everyone wrong. Be great. So, Adam, please say goodnight.
Good night, everyone.
Fuck.
Bye, everybody.
I'll say goodnight too, and I'll let Scott say goodnight for himself.
Thank you very much for having me, guys, and good night, ladies and gentlemen.
Been a pleasure. And Radio Mike, please take us out of here.
So, there you have it. Straight from the horse's mouth, or the Scotty's mouth. I don't know, that metaphor kind of got away from me. But one thing that won't get away from you is you can join us next month for more Wobbly Player Syndrome.